Melody's life was not easy. One day, her criminal mother brought into their home a little kidnapped girl, Loretta, who was the secret daughter of the Duke and the main character of the novel, The Duke's Four Children. She should be a villain, but knowing what awaits her and her mother for stealing and hiding the child, the girl tried to convince her mother, for which she was severely punished. Melody has only one way to save herself: to befriend the stolen girl. She took care of the baby, fed her, put her to bed and played with her. They became very close, and the Duke accepted her into his family. Melody received love, despite the fact that according to the plot she should be an outcast and a villain. She saw through the window how her mother got out of the carriage and approached the house. The girl knew in advance that there was a bunch of stolen things in the carriage again. The villainous lady knew a thing or two about theft. She was a professional. But what a surprise it was for Melody when she saw that her mother was taking from the carriage, in addition to the stolen things, a little blonde girl. The little girl was very scared. By the time the girl went downstairs, the mother had already managed to drag everything inside the house, including the little girl. It turned out that on the way back from the auction, the woman had come across an overturned carriage. The mother was simply fluttering in the air with pleasure. She managed to drag everything that was in the carriage into the house. Judging by the boxes and chests with expensive things and jewelry, very rich people were riding in it. Melody knew perfectly well that the owners of this broken vehicle would be looking for their luggage, and if it was found in their house, then both her mother and herself would be in trouble. And what to do with this little one? The mother didn't think about such things. She was enjoying the moment and was glad that she had managed to get the contents of the carriage. The girl sighed deeply. She was the daughter of a villainous merchant, and that couldn't be changed. But Melody didn't know then that meeting this golden-haired little girl would change her life completely. The course of events in the girl's life began to develop completely differently than she had expected. The mother found beautiful, expensive fabrics in the boxes from the carriage. She decided that she would sew beautiful dresses for herself from them, and if there was a piece of fabric left, she would share it with her daughter. Melody didn't understand her self-assured mother's way of thinking. She had never supported the woman in anything she had done for many years. It had gotten to the point that today, her mother had stolen a child. The girl suddenly thought that perhaps this little girl was the only child in some rich family, and now her parents are restless in their search for their daughter. But her own mother doesn't care about it. When the girl voiced this thought out loud, her mother laughed merrily and said that aristocrats have enough children to store them in attics. Due to money, rich people forget about children. To Melody's surprise, the woman did not send the baby to the attic but left her in her room. She said that she would keep an eye on the child and make sure that the girl did not escape. For some reason, Melody remembered her childhood from a past life. When she was 5 years old, her mother often left her alone and went somewhere. The girl felt terribly lonely and cried constantly. Fortunately, she managed to gradually get used to the state of loneliness. From the memories of her past life that remain, it is clear that her path now is no different from that of her past. Years later, when Melody was 10 years old, the fragments of memories began to form a whole terrible and rather sad picture. It was always scary and very painful. Every night the girl seemed to be reading a large, fascinating novel, looking through the intricate plots hovering over her head. In them, she became independent already at the age of 15. To earn at least a little money, the young girl had to work very hard. But Melody was never afraid of work. Compared to her peers and adults, she always looked inferior, but this did not scare her. Her whole appearance, from her clothes to her old pair of shoes, showed that she was in a dire situation. But she hoped that someone would appear who could cheer her up, but unfortunately, no one came. Despite her difficult and dreary life, Melody found solace in books. She read and studied a lot. She also liked one story that was popular among girls. This novel was about a rich and influential duke who had 3 sons and 1 beloved daughter. The girl thought that this novel deserved attention and admired this story for a long time. Whatever one may say, at least in the novel she found consolation for herself. At least in the book there was a happy ending. The heroes went through a difficult path, fought against all the adversities, and eventually found happiness. Very often, sitting with a book until late at night, the poor thing compared her life with the lives of the novel's heroes. The experiences, memories, and feelings described in the book were very similar to her own. The novel was about a little 5-year-old girl named Loretta. The main character got into an accident with her parents. Unfortunately, they couldn't save her mom and dad, and the little girl was left an orphan. Then it happened that the girl was kidnapped by an evil slave trader by chance. The woman brought the child to her home, and it was there that the little girl first met her daughter, the antagonist. As it turned out, this meeting later became fateful. He stole a baby, the thief treated her very terribly, locked her in a closet, and starved her. Sometimes the girl thought that she would never be able to see her family or see the world again. But the last event in the first chapter of the novel was the arrival of a famous, influential duke in the capital. It turned out that he was looking for his little stolen daughter. The duke condemned the criminals and no one saw them again. While reading the lines of the novel, Melody sometimes got angry at herself. How could she like this book if she and the villain were so similar? After all, her mother also stole a little girl who was someone's biological daughter. Yes, she did not argue. The novel was really very interesting, but then the girl could not know that one day the plot of this book would come true in real life. Melody would become one of the main characters of this novel. She is the illegitimate daughter of a notorious slave trader, and even though she is completely uninvolved in her mother's terrible deeds, Melody is constantly troubled by a strange sense of guilt. She will also be punished for stealing a child. How many times did the girl try to reason with her wayward mother and convince her that stealing was a terrible sin and, moreover, punishable by law? But the slave trader did not want to listen to anything and only got angry and humiliated the girl. Melody was being accused of a lot of things. Her mother was screaming that she wouldn't listen to any moralizing, and if the girl didn't like something, she could always leave this house and look for a better life for herself. With nowhere to go, the girl came up with the best way to survive and avoid punishment for her complicity in the kidnapping of the child. She would make friends with the main character and thus avoid the Duke's wrath. The slave trader was terribly angry that her wayward daughter was taking care of the stolen girl. She brought her food to her room and constantly tried to comfort the little girl. Why she did this, the woman did not know and did not particularly want to know. Melody saw a name engraved on the necklace that belonged to the baby. It turned out that the girl's name was Loretta. Judging by the jewelry, the slave trader stole the child from a very rich family, and Melody had no doubt that they would look for her. The little girl was very scared. She barely spoke and refused to eat. When Melody entered her room, she buried herself in the blanket so as not to be seen. In this way, the little girl protected herself. Often the girl would simply bring a plate of food for Loretta, leave it in the room, and then leave. She thought the little girl was embarrassed to eat in front of witnesses, so she gave her the opportunity to have a snack alone. One day, Melody brought the girl a delicious soup that she had prepared herself and put it on the nightstand. Then she quietly stood behind the slightly open door and began to watch the little girl who was carefully eating. Another week passed, and the baby began to trust the kind stranger more, who took her to her room and allowed her to lie down on a soft, comfortable bed. She would be able to sleep like before, at home. The girl felt incredibly sorry for the child. She was so small and already had to endure such life's difficulties. Therefore, she tried with all her might to somehow brighten up the poor thing's loneliness. Even in her sleep, little Loretta sometimes cried and often shuddered. She must have had nightmares, and in those nightmares, she definitely saw Melody's mother. The girl did not doubt it at all. The next morning, Melody decided to bring the baby some cocoa in bed, but she was terribly surprised to see that Loretta was no longer hiding behind the blanket, but was sitting quietly at the table and confidently looking at the girl. She put a cup of hot drink on the table and warned the little girl that the cocoa was very hot, so she had to blow on it first. Suddenly, the mother's scream was heard from the kitchen, calling Melody, and she had to leave the girl alone. By evening, the sky was covered with menacing clouds. A thunderstorm was about to begin. Melody was worried about Loretta. If thunder broke out and lightning began to flash, she might get scared. Suddenly, someone knocked softly on the door. The girl already guessed who she would see on the threshold of her room, and she was not mistaken. Opening the door, Melody saw Loretta, who was trembling with fear. The little one quickly ran up to Melody and buried her face in her chest. Then she started crying. She was very scared of the storm, and it's not surprising because all little children are terrified of thunder. The girl thought that now she should open the window and let some fresh air into the room. It would help the baby calm down. But when she began to open the curtains, Loretta hid under the blanket. And then, Melody understood. Yes, that night, when the carriage with Loretta's parents crashed, there was a terrible rain and thunder. It was then, that night, that her mother brought home the child stolen from that carriage. To be honest, the girl was also afraid of such elements. When she heard thunder, she always covered her ears with her hands. She did not understand what had happened in her past life that caused such panic. Melody walked up to the girl and gently pulled the blanket off her. Then, just as slowly, she took Loretta's hands in her own and brought them to the baby's ears. At least she knew how to help her overcome her fear. The girl opened her eyes wide. Indeed, it was not so scary. The noise of the rain and thunder was much less audible. She was incredibly grateful to Melody for such a gesture. She really helped her. When the baby calmed down a little, the girl did not let her go to her room, but decided that it would be better for Loretta to spend the night with her. And she offered her to sleep in her bed. Judging from the plot of the novel, this chapter was about to end. Melody knew it well. So she told the little girl not to worry about anything. Good days were coming in her life soon. The man sat at his desk, trying his best to concentrate on his paperwork. But he was doing a terrible job. He couldn't get his baby out of his head. How was she? Where was she now? Was she in danger? A sudden knock on the office door brought him back to reality. 2 detectives entered the room. They were a little excited and reported that they had found a girl. The place was quite secluded but far away. It made no difference to him whether it was far or near. He had to leave right now. So the Duke ordered the horses to be prepared and set out immediately. There was no time to waste. A little time passed, and the girl gradually got used to Melody's company. She began to talk more. Having received colored pencils as a gift, she began to draw various pictures. The girl, in turn, also got used to the baby. She took care of her, worried when she was sad, and was very happy about Loretta's successes. The girls spent more and more time doing things together. The girl very often asked Melody to play house with her, and the older one understood that this was necessary for the little one. For her, this was not a game at all. She really missed her real family. But the strange thing was that there was no role of mother in this game. As it turned out later, the little girl did not know who her mother was. She did not understand at all who she was and what her role in the game was. Melody remembered that in the novel, the heroine also did not remember her mother. Every day the girl taught the little girl to read, and she made great progress. Loretta was a very capable little girl. Melody knew from the novel that the girl would soon return to her big mansion. Her father would find her. Melody decided to tell the little girl that she was the daughter of a very influential duke, and that her father would soon find her and take her back to the family palace. All that was left was to wait a little. The little girl seemed very surprised by these words. How could this be? Then the girl asked if Melody would go with her when her father found her. After all, she was so used to her and considered her her older sister. But the girl replied that her home was here, and that she had a mother whom she did not want to leave alone. Loretta was clearly very upset. Tears of disappointment appeared on her face. It seemed that the little girl was having a real hysteria. Tears were streaming from her eyes, and neither sweet cookies, nor toys, nor soothing words helped. It turned out that Loretta was terrified of carriages. Melody burst into the room at the sound of the girl's screams and wails. The woman was terribly angry at the noise from the room, as well as the crying and sobbing of the little girl. She opened the door wide and ordered both of them to calm down. The mother yelled at her daughter because she couldn't calm the little child down, and she yelled at Loretta because she was constantly whining. The woman warned them clearly. If anyone squeaked again, they would be very sorry about it. When the angry woman left the room, Melody tried to calm the child down once again. She picked the girl up and started stroking her fluffy hair. The girl understood that this nightmare would soon end. At one point, the little girl turned around and hugged her beloved savior tightly. She said that even if her family found her, she did not want to live where her beloved Melody was not. After a little more time, the girl began to worry a little. For some reason, The events in reality do not match the plot of the novel. Autumn has already arrived, and no one has come to Loretta. Will the girl really stay with the villain for the rest of her life? More and more often, the villainess said that little Loretta was their money bag, and more often the woman asked to look after the baby carefully. She should not need anything. She cannot be sick or upset. After all, then her relatives might reject her. Melody understood perfectly well. Her mother called the baby a money bag with shiny gold coins for a reason. Apparently, the woman knew whose daughter the missing baby was and was expecting a solid ransom for her. One day, the little girl slipped on the floor and fell. As she fell, she caught a plate of soup from the table. Melody was terribly afraid that the little girl could hurt herself and immediately ran to her. And so it happened. Little Loretta hurt her leg. She fell on a broken plate and scratched her skin badly. Blood came out of the wound. The villainess, watching this scene, became terribly angry. The woman seemed about to burst with anger. She yelled at her daughter for her inattention and ordered to call a doctor as soon as possible. If the girl had even a scar, the Duke would not want to take her. Despite the incessant rain and the terrible cold, Melody ran for a doctor. What if the scar on Loretta's leg never healed? What if the Duke punished her even more terribly for harming his daughter? The girl began to panic. Melody ran without looking where she was going, and of course without paying any attention to where she was going. That's why she didn't notice the big stone in the middle of the road, which she tripped over and fell. But she was in such a state that she didn't even feel any pain. Soaking wet, the girl fell to her knees right in the middle of the road and began to cry. If she hadn't gotten closer to her, if she hadn't contradicted her mother, everything would have happened differently. But all the troubles happened solely because of her. But she couldn't suffer for too long. Little Loretta was waiting for her at home with a wounded knee, and she wouldn't let this little girl be unhappy. Melody would do everything in her power to return the girl to her father. So Melody rose from her knees and walked towards the house of their family doctor, Mrs. Merlin. The girl did not even notice how a beautiful, expensive carriage passed by her. But the people in the carriage noticed her. A handsome young man sat in the carriage and stared at the sad and completely soaked girl. Where could she go in such terrible weather? She was completely frozen, and her face was sad. She had recently been crying. Mrs. Merlin was about to go to bed. The weather was disgusting, and she wanted to get into a warm bed as soon as possible. Suddenly there was a knock at the door, and the woman headed into the hallway. Who could it be at this hour? Something must have happened. Opening the door, the doctor saw Melody, soaking wet, on the threshold. The girl was shaking and her face was terribly frightened. From fear, the poor thing could not even properly explain why she came to the doctor. But Mrs. Merlin understood everything at once, because the girl was covered in bruises. She had been beaten again by this crazy villainess. She must have been drunk again and couldn't contain her anger. The doctor had warned the woman more than once that if she ever offended her daughter again, she would report her to the police and the guards would throw her in the local prison. But it seemed the woman didn't care about the doctor's word. But Melody didn't care about her health now. She asked Mrs. Merlin to go to their house as soon as possible. The little girl who lived with them had a knee injury and needed medical attention. Melody understood perfectly well that Mrs. Merlin did not particularly want to help the slave trader, much less go to her house. So the girl began to beg. She said that it was her own fault that the little girl was hurt. After a few minutes of explanations and begging, the doctor agreed to help the baby. The woman put Melody on the horse, and together they went to the slave trader's house. She was very worried about Loretta without her, because she was very afraid of the rain and could get scared. As they approached the slave trader's house, they saw a beautiful carriage standing at the entrance. But who could it be, and at such a late hour? The lady doctor decided to stop the horse behind the trees and watch. Judging by the carriage and its high cost, it belonged to some high-ranking aristocrat, but Melody understood perfectly well who was the owner of this carriage and why he was here. A terrible thought flashed through Melody's mind. She remembered the plot of the novel. One rainy autumn evening, little Loretta's father, a well-known and influential duke, was supposed to come for her. The girl told the doctor that she needed to go into the house immediately, but the woman stopped her. She said that Melody would endanger herself in this way. Let the villain answer for her own crimes. Indeed, Melody was innocent. It was her mother who stole the child and must answer for it. Thanks to the lady doctor, the girl will be able to avoid a terrible punishment. But what about little Loretta? Melody saw two men coming out of her house, and with them the little girl, who was holding her favorite teddy bear. One of the men, obviously the Duke, was very excited. This is not surprising, because he found his daughter. For some reason, Molodets felt very sad at heart. She had gotten so used to this funny little girl, but her time with Loretta was over. Now the girl would return to a happy family life and would forget this nightmare in a few months. They were very good together, and the girl could give her head flatly that the baby would also miss her at first, but then she would forget everything because she would have new friends from her social circle. And truth be told, Melody should be happy that Loretta is returning to her father. But why is it so hard for her to let the girl go? Maybe because he is the only person who has ever treated her with kindness. Then Melody looked back at the door of her house and saw her villainous mother kneeling. Her hands were tied, and guards stood by her. The Duke, in an icy voice, ordered her to be taken to the central prison. Dr. Merlin also saw this picture and decided that it was necessary to quickly take the girl away from here. Otherwise, she could also fall under the hot hand of the Duke and end up in prison as an accomplice. The doctor arrived at her house very quickly. She gave Melody dry clothes and put a plate of hot soup in front of her, but the girl didn't want to eat at all. She wanted to cry. The next morning, the girl was restless. She wanted to run home. Somewhere in her subconscious, she still dreamed of finding little Loretta there, but the doctor persuaded her to stay. To somehow distract the girl from sad thoughts, the woman suggested that she start studying medicine. It is very interesting, and most importantly, useful. In the future, she will be able to help people. Mrs. Merlin's son used to study to be a doctor, but then he decided he wanted to be a knight and went to night school. His room is empty now, and Melody can stay there. The girl thought about it. She would definitely be better off here than in the villainess's empty house. And Dr. Merlin wouldn't be so lonely, because her son visited her very rarely because he was so busy at school. The next day, Melody decided to go to her house to get some things, but everything inside was turned upside down. Her mother had taken everything, even her daughter's clothes. There was nothing to talk about any savings. She found a crumpled drawing on the floor of her room. Little Loretta had drawn it just for Melody. Tears came to her eyes. She would never see that bright little girl again. Melody leaned over the sheet of paper. She should have stayed that evening and said goodbye to the baby. That way she could tell Loretta about the dangers that awaited her further. This little girl brought her back to life and allowed herself to be loved. She felt so good during the times when she could take care of this girl. Melody felt love and affection in return. She didn't remember how long she sat there on the floor looking at the child's drawing, but suddenly she heard footsteps in the hallway. They were definitely a child's footsteps. Melody was sure of it. The girl turned around and froze. Little Loretta appeared in the doorway. She saw the girl and threw herself on her neck. They hugged each other tightly, and each had tears in her eyes. After a few minutes, the little girl pulled away and looked at the girl carefully. Then she asked why she was crying, who had offended her. Let her just tell him, and the girl would sort it out in a jiffy. Melody was so confused and upset that she started to hiccup. It looked pretty stupid from the outside. She even managed to make the girl laugh. The girl wanted to help her, but she didn't know how. Suddenly, the girl saw another silhouette nearby, and then a strong male hand extended a flask of water to her. Melody looked up and saw the Duke standing right in front of her. He was watching her. The man was very handsome and well-groomed. Although the girl saw him for the first time, she immediately understood who was standing in front of her. There could be no doubt. If Loretta was here, then her father must be nearby. It was him, the Duke of the World Kingdom, Wayne Baldwin. He was a very strong and influential person in the country. Many were afraid of him, but mostly respected and admired him. The girl did not even dare to raise her eyes, but immediately fell to her knees and began to ask for forgiveness, from which the man concluded that she was that very Melody, the daughter of the slave trader. Wayne looked at the girl with surprised eyes and did not understand at all what she was asking for forgiveness for, but she had already answered. She was ashamed of her mother and of the fact that she had broken the law and stolen his daughter. The Duke replied in a calm voice that he could find out what punishment awaited her mother, but that she herself was not guilty of anything. He was sure that she did not help her mother to do her dark deeds. Melody said that she never helped her mother. On the contrary, she always asked her to stop and start living a normal life. But of course, the woman did not listen to her words at all. The Duke ordered the girl to follow him. After all, leaving her here in a half-ruined house was not an option. He wanted to place Melody in the infirmary of the capital's temple. The girl was very surprised. As far as she knew, this infirmary served only people from aristocratic families. She could not even imagine that she would end up in such a place. Melody knew that the Duke had shown mercy only because she had been taking care of his missing daughter all this time. That was all. But if she accepted this reward, she would never see Loretta again. So Melody sat down next to the little girl and decided to say goodbye to her properly. She took the girl by the hands and said that she loved her very much. She replied that she also loved the girl with all her heart. And then the little girl stood up and looked at the Duke seriously. Then she said that she could not live without Melody any longer. So she decided to stay with the girl. The man frowned and thought. Indeed, when Loretta was taken from this house, she cried bitterly and constantly called for Melody. But the girl was nowhere to be found, so he had no idea who she was. Melody also thought about it. If she studied to be a doctor, she could definitely become a better person than her mother. She escaped punishment because she knew from the novel what would happen to her in the future. And she knows the future fate of this girl very well. All the hardships and happy moments of her life that will happen to her remained in Melody's memory. It was not for nothing that she reread the novel several times. But then the girl thought that she could provide Loretta with the best possible future. For the first time, something appeared that only she could give this girl, and she had to use it. So Melody approached the Duke and decided not to lose her chance. She asked the man to let her stay with little Loretta. That way his daughter would feel more at ease. Dr. Merlin was surprised by the girl's decision, but deep down she was very happy for her. She understood that Melody had more chances to arrange her life in the capital, but she had to be careful with the Duke. Melody thanked the kind woman for all the good she had done for her. If it weren't for Merlin, it was unclear where she would have ended up, and the woman, in turn, was grateful to the girl. The doctor reminded her once again that the doors of her home were always open to her, and if life in the capital seemed too difficult for Melody, she could return to her home at any time. Dr. Merlin said goodbye to the girl and asked that if she met her son in the capital, she should tell him her mother's greetings. She should also say that his mother misses him very much and is waiting for her son to visit. Meanwhile, the doctor's son, the knight apprentice Isaiah, was in the night school. But the boy didn't particularly like it there. This was not how he imagined the everyday life of glorious warriors. Everything irritated him, from the constant same food for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, to teachers and classmates. He was always dissatisfied, unlike the other students. Very often he noticed that his snakes suddenly turned red. The guy did not understand what was going on, but his friends explained that this was a direct sign that someone often thought about him. The road to the capital turned out to be quite long. The carriage moved quite slowly, so Melody did not notice how she fell asleep. The Duke, who was sitting opposite, managed to look at the girl very carefully. When the girl opened her eyes, she saw the Duke's gaze fixed on her. He looked straight into her eyes. She looked down. Little Loretta was snoring peacefully on her lap. The girl apologized for falling asleep, but the man didn't even pay attention to her words. He smiled thoughtfully and said that it seemed that his daughter really liked sleeping on Melody's lap and feeling her presence nearby. The girl was silent for a while, but decided to clarify something. She told the Duke that she suspected that his daughter did not remember her life before the kidnapping. Perhaps, due to stress, she lost her memory. And Loretta is afraid of the sound of rain. There was a thunderstorm on the day she went missing, so that incident left a deep mark on her. Melody didn't ask the little girl anything else. The man was noticeably upset. He also kept silent for a while, and then said that perhaps the girl needed more time to come to her senses, calm down, and remember everything. Then the Duke thanked the girl for her story and added at the end that he was not sure whether the girl was her daughter. This would still need to be proven, and the fact that they looked alike meant nothing at all. The girl smiled and replied that external similarity had nothing to do with it. They were similar internally because both radiated light and warmth from within, and he would not look at someone else's child with such love. The weather in the capital was wonderful. The carriage was approaching the central gates of the city. Melody was delighted by the beauty and pomp of this place. Would she really be lucky enough to live here? The girl looked out the carriage window and saw 2 horsemen approaching the carriage. One of them shouted to the Duke to hurry up because His Majesty the King had been waiting for him for a long time. For the Duke, this news was not surprising because the man had been absent from the palace for almost a month. Therefore, the Duke ordered the coachman to go straight to the imperial palace. The little girl and Melody stared out the window. They were both in complete rapture. It seemed that the little girl was also seeing such beauty around her for the first time. The servants came out onto the porch and greeted the guests. In the living room, the girls were met by a middle-aged couple. The man and woman had worked there for a long time. They were the Higgins couple, the butler and head housekeeper. They had been warned about the guest. The man extended his hand to Loretta and said that he would take her into the house to her room. The girl was a little scared and asked if Melody would stay with her, but she only smiled and said that she would visit her later. She stood and watched as Loretta was taken away. She heard footsteps behind her and looked back. The housekeeper was standing behind her, looking at the girl with hatred. In a dry voice, she ordered them to go downstairs. Downstairs, a full bathtub with beautiful, lush foam was already waiting for her. Melody had never taken a bath, so she felt a little awkward and constrained. She was ashamed. The girl cautiously tested the water with her hand. It was too hot, so she reached for a bucket of cold water and dragged it toward the bathtub, but Mrs. Higgins immediately yelled at her. Melody didn't understand why the woman was so angry. She didn't want to boil the girl in boiling water, but she abruptly took the bucket from her and told her not to dare lift such heavy things again. Only after the housekeeper adjusted the water temperature did she allow the guests to climb in and enjoy. Melody had a culture shock. Warm, fragrant water, soap, personal care products. That was all for her. Mrs. Higgins said that the girl could sit in the water as long as she wanted, and she wanted to stay in the water for a very long time because she had never felt so good and relaxed in her life. The woman wasn't really that mean. She came to Melody and said she would add healing herbs to the water to make her skin silky and soft. Then she asked the girl to call her Auntie. In the evening, the girl went to little Loretta's room. Auntie gave her a beautiful nightgown, and it seemed to her that now she looked like a beautiful young lady from a fairy tale. They chatted for a long time, laughed and joked, and Melody was glad that the girl was having fun, and a smile was shining on her face. They had already discussed all the servants, today's lunch and dinner, as well as their rooms. Melody knew that they had had a hard and emotional day. The baby needed to sleep and gain strength, and she herself was very tired today. So much had happened recently. The morning in the castle was sunny and quiet. Melody woke up quite early. Loretta was still fast asleep. The girl thought that it was time to get up, because she was not the Count's daughter, but only his daughter's nanny. A few minutes later, someone quietly entered the room. Melody thought that it was her aunt who had come to wake her up, but when she opened her eyes, she saw a young man near the bed. He looked at little Loretta with obvious malice. Why was she so small and skinny? Was she not fed at all? And why was she sleeping here instead of in her own chambers? Maybe she was not of the Baldwin family. Usually, he didn't come first in the morning to say hello, but now he made an exception, and this impudent girl didn't even deign to open her eyes. Melody lay there and was afraid to move. Apparently, it was little Loretta's second brother, Ronnie Baldwin. The young man was not distinguished by politeness and hospitality. But how can this be? The guy behaves as if he is seeing his little sister for the first time. The guy had already reached out his hand to Loretta to shake her and wake her up, but suddenly someone jumped up from the other side of the bed and grabbed his hand. Ronnie was even a little scared. The blanket moved again, and a girl's head appeared. She put her finger to her lips, signaling the guy not to make noise. He was even more surprised. Who is this, and what is this girl doing in the baby's bed? Ronnie wasn't used to being treated like that. He was the son of a famous duke. How could this crazy woman grab his hand and tell him what to do and when? By the way, Loretta was his sister. The boy hissed at Melody to get out of the palace. He said they were all the same, doing anything to get into Duke Baldwin's house. Then he called the girl a liar. The boy seemed to be in a real rage. He said that people were constantly bringing strangers to their house and introducing them as the Duke's relatives. And then the father suffered when he found out the truth. The guy shouted again for the girl to go home and not disturb their peaceful life. Then he turned and ran out of the bedroom. And Melody thought, this was not the meeting with Loretta's brother she expected. The noise in the room disturbed the baby's peaceful sleep. Loretta woke up and called Melody. She immediately came to the bed. The girl said that from now on she would call the baby Miss Loretta. Several days passed. Melody and Loretta gradually got used to their new place of residence. They rarely saw the Duke. He was always busy. The elder sent him an urgent letter. The Duke walked down the alley, reading the message as he went. But suddenly little Loretta appeared in his path. She greeted him politely and said that she wished she were as tall as the man. He smiled and asked if the little girl had eaten all the food she had been offered for breakfast. She replied that she had eaten absolutely everything, because the food was so delicious. That's why she even asked for more. The girl was incredibly pleased that the man was asking if she had breakfast and if everything was okay with her. She still hadn't remembered a single fact about their shared past. The maids followed the girl into the garden. They were looking for the little girl, as they had not yet finished their toilette and had not even gotten around to doing their hair. The Duke's daughter could not be walking around the street like that. The Duke smiled slightly. It seemed that little Loretta did not care at all what she wore to walk around the garden. He handed the little girl over to the servants, saying that they would see each other at dinner. Returning to the house, the man called the butler and ordered him to get rid of all the sharp and slippery objects in the living room. The children were running around the house and this could harm them. The Duke then asked Mr. Higgins if there had been any reply from the temple. He was looking forward to this letter. But the butler replied that, apart from the message that the high priest was very busy, no other messages had been received. He understood perfectly well why the temple was so slow in responding. They simply needed to increase the amount of donations, as the clergy had hoped. So the Duke headed to his office to organize everything. The man also asked the butler to go to his daughter's room and say hello from him. He didn't want to see the girl now, whose relationship he doubted. Plus, Melody was probably sitting with her, and he didn't want any unnecessary questions. As it turned out, some of the servants were not very happy about the fact that there was a child living in the house again, and it was not at all a fact that this child was their master's own daughter. Rumors had already spread around the city that the Duke had taken in someone else's child. It is surprising that the Duke's missing wife gave birth to a child 6 years ago, and no one really knows for sure whether this baby is the Duke's real daughter. The man himself was never affectionate with her, and this is alarming. Such thoughts had not left the curious maid's head for several days. I wonder if the master finds out that the girl is not his own. Will he throw the baby out the door or leave her in the palace? She really wanted to get to the bottom of the truth. Loretta had hoped very much to see her father at dinner, but the man did not appear. The servants put a variety of delicious things on the table, and the girl forgot that she was sad. She had to try each dish and enjoy the taste. Suddenly, the same maid appeared near the table. She smiled strangely at the girl and asked if she was sure that Mr. Baldwin was really her father. The girl widened her eyes, but calmly answered that the Duke was her father. Then the woman decided to ask where the girl got this information. Maybe the priest told her? But Loretta confidently answered that Melody told her about it. But the nasty maid did not stop. She said that the words of the slave trader's daughter could not be considered reliable. Melody could be lying. The Duke's daughter Loretta must be recognized by a priest from the temple. The woman smiled sarcastically again and noted out loud that the gentleman had not allowed the little girl to occupy the room that was intended for his daughter and was located on the second floor. Therefore, the girl would have to try hard to get there. Then the maid leaned towards the little girl's ear and whispered a very important piece of information. If the priest did not recognize her as Duke Baldwin's daughter, then Melody would be put behind bars with bad people for deceiving and stealing children. Little Loretta froze in place in horror. She certainly didn't expect this. She would do absolutely anything to keep her little sister Melody close to her. Otherwise, she would go to prison too, to be with her savior. The little girl ran to Melody's room. She decided that something would help her do more good deeds. Then the Duke would see how good Loretta was and would definitely understand that she was his daughter. But Melody didn't quite understand why the girl wanted to do good deeds. Why did she need it? Who told her to do that? After all, she was already very kind and sweet. It was impossible not to love her. She asked the girl about this. There, in turn, she burst into tears and told the girl what the shameless servant had told her. Loretta is very afraid of losing Melody. But on the other hand, the little girl knows for sure that Duke Baldwin is very kind. He allowed the little girl to take Melody with him to the palace. An evil person would never do such a thing. And the girls also remembered that the Duke had ordered all the glass decorations in the living room to be removed so that they wouldn't get hurt. Would a bad person give such orders? Probably not. The Duke was wandering around the corridors of his palace at the time. He didn't know how to behave with the little guests. He still wasn't sure that Loretta was his daughter, but he needed to cheer the girls up somehow. So the next morning, Loretta and Melody received beautiful gifts. They were beautiful hats for walking in the garden. The man saw how the girls admired his garden. Loretta was absolutely crazy about the gift. She immediately rushed to try on the hat and said that now she would walk around the palace grounds in it every day. Let everyone see how beautiful it was. The little girl was not at all embarrassed by the presence of the economy and the butler in the room. She ran around the table like crazy and constantly asked when they would finally go for a walk. Melody was also pleased with the gift, but on the other hand, such a surprise embarrassed her very much. She said that she would like to thank the Duke first, but the Higgins couple informed him that he would not return to the palace until late in the evening. Then the girl asked the butler to personally convey her gratitude to the Duke. She was delighted with the hat and now knew that Mr. Baldwin had excellent taste. After that, the girl decided to try on the gift. She put on the hat and asked the butler and housekeeper if the headdress suited her. The couple answered that she looked like a little duchess. Meanwhile, the maids continued to discuss the situation in the house. One of them really wanted to serve little Loretta, if she really turned out to be the Duke's biological daughter. The maid praised the girl for behaving very well and doing good deeds. The Duke always notices this. It was not for nothing that he gave her such a beautiful, cute hat. Loretta awkwardly reminded the evil maid that parents often give gifts to their children, but she replied that it was not yet clear whether the girl was the Duke's child. The woman leaned over to the little girl again and reminded her to continue to be very nice. Then she would be taken to the temple, and the priest would recognize her as the Duke's daughter. The second maid asked Alta not to overdo it and not to forget that she was a simple maid. There was no point in giving advice left and right. The master would figure everything out himself, without any helpers. The little girl felt uncomfortable that even the maids were discussing her personal life and her father's life, so she turned around abruptly and ran to find Aunt Higgins. That's who she should ask for advice. 5 minutes later, the little girl was already standing in front of the head economist. She needed advice. She asked the woman if she knew why the Duke had given her the red hat. After all, the maid had said that it was thanks to her. The woman listened to the little girl in silence and immediately went to look for Alta. The maid immediately understood what had happened, so she began to wriggle out of it, saying that the girl had misunderstood her words. The maid began to justify herself, saying that she was very upset because Melody might end up behind bars, so she asked Loretta to behave well and be kind to everyone. But little Loretta, hiding behind Mrs. Higgins, told the whole truth. When she was eating in the garden, Alta told her that she was not the Duke's daughter until the priest recognized her as such. Therefore, the little girl must constantly behave very well so that the Duke will notice her and love her. Then he will give her a room on the second floor and will allow Melody to stay in the palace. Alta realized that this was the end. She immediately fell to her knees and began to beg forgiveness from the head housekeeper. She explained that she had made a mistake, that she had been very wrong. Loretta came closer to the maid and asked why she had done this to her. After all, the girl had not done anything bad to her. The woman answered that she had worked very hard to get into the palace to the Duke. Then she suddenly rose from her knees and screamed that she would not allow some strange brat to ruin her entire life. She even raised her hand and swung it to hit little Loretta. But suddenly Melody stood in the maid's way. She was very serious. With one hand, she quickly pushed the little girl behind her back and in a sharp voice warned the maid not to dare raise her hand to Loretta. An hour later, the girls were seated at a table with a huge, beautiful cake on it. The Higgins couple stood nearby. The butler said that this was compensation for a nervous morning. Then he added that the evil maid had already been fired. Mrs. Higgins seemed very sad. She also apologized to the girls. In future, she would be more vigilant in selecting staff for little Loretta and her nurse. To ease the tension a little, Melody suggested that the Higgins couple enjoy a delicious cake together. The man and woman were not against it. They all had a fun and enjoyable time together. During a cheerful tea party, the company did not notice how a very distinguished elderly man entered the garden. He was accompanied by his assistants and headed straight to the gazebo. At this time, in the study, the Duke was asking his butler about the dismissed maid. He ordered the man to send letters to neighboring estates so that the woman would not be hired there either. Then the man asked what the children were doing and how they were feeling. Mr. Higgins said that they had been walking in the garden together and then had tea with a delicious cake. The girls were very happy. Suddenly, someone knocked softly on the door. The butler came up and opened it. Melody appeared on the threshold. In her hands she held the hat given to her by the Duke. The girl greeted him timidly. The girl said that she was very grateful to Mr. Baldwin for his gift. She also thanks him on behalf of Loretta. The baby fell asleep, so she couldn't come. The hats are simply delightful. The Duke even stood up from the table. He was glad that his gift was to the girl's taste. He was also pleased that Melody came to thank him personally. This girl is very nice and well-mannered. Then the man thought that he shouldn't be so kind to the slave trader's daughter, so he put his face back on straight, thanked the girl, and asked her to go back to her room. The next morning, Melody looked sadly at the garden from her balcony. Time dragged on very slowly and monotonously. In this palace, everyone cared only that the girl did not overexert herself. So the girl decided to go down to Aunt Higgins's kitchen and help her with the cooking. The woman was surprised, but said nothing. Let the girl do something. The woman watched Melody work. She got it right the first time. Her movements were precise and correct. It was obvious that this was not her first time in the kitchen, and that cooking did not frighten her at all. After the food was ready, Mrs. Higgins treated the girl to some roasted peanuts. She told the girl not to come into the kitchen again. There was a lot of fuss and preparations going on here. Melody asked what kind of celebration was being prepared at the palace, and the housekeeper informed her that 3 elders from the Baldwin family were coming to the Duke's house, and she needed to prepare a dinner for these old grumblers. The girl asked why they had arrived before little Loretta had gone to the temple to be recognized as the Duke's daughter, but the woman pretended not to hear the question and sent Melody to her room. She went upstairs to her bedroom, but the news of the elders coming to the house did not give her peace. Why were they coming? How would they react to Loretta's appearance in the house? Suddenly, her candle went out. Melody was startled and remembered the housekeeper's words about not running into anyone at such a time. A hand grabbed her shoulder and she froze in place. She stood there for a few seconds, motionless. Then she realized that the one standing behind her had also frozen. Perhaps he was scared too. Melody turned around abruptly and saw young Mr. Ronnie standing in front of her. It so happened that they scared each other. Ronnie sat down on the sofa and said with displeasure that he went to visit his younger sister, but she behaved as if she did not remember him at all. The young men began to talk, and then Ronnie asked the girl to bend down so that he could tell her some important information. The boy told her to beware of the elders, because they did not like the Duke. If these elders don't like Melody and Loretta, they will do everything to make the girls leave Duke Baldwin's house, so it's best not to catch their eye. Something was wrong here. The girl remembered the plot of the novel. There Ronnie was angry and very sarcastic, but in reality he tries with all his might to help Loretta stay in her father's house. The girl decided to thank Ronnie for his help. He really told her many important things. She will definitely pass on all his words to little Loretta, and she will definitely appreciate her brother's deed. Ronnie turned around. It seemed like he was having a hard time looking the girl in the eye, so he tried to look away. The guy said he was afraid that the elders would make him throw the girls out. Melody's eyes widened. Why? They hadn't even seen her, and they had probably never seen Loretta either. So why were they so interested in the Duke's daughter leaving her parents' home? The girl's words made the Duke's son even more angry. This fool doesn't understand why such high-ranking people pay so much attention to her, and why does she think he doesn't worry about her? The guy slammed the door loudly and disappeared. Melody was left standing in the middle of the room, completely bewildered. She didn't understand anything. And most importantly, it was not clear whose side this rude guy was on. At this late hour, an important meeting was taking place in the Duke's study. The elders were talking with Mr. Baldwin, and the conversation was rather unpleasant. It was clearly visible on their faces. The chief elder accused the Duke of violating the traditions of the Baldwin house, rumors that he was looking for his daughter and accepting all children into the palace, and this in turn affects the prestige of the family. The man sat thoughtful and calm. He was tired of proving to these respectable and nasty old bores that it was important for him to find his child, and he would not rest until he did so. The girls' morning, as always, began with a delicious breakfast. They did not go to the dining room. The maid set the table for them right next to Loretta's bed. Perhaps the Duke ordered it so that the elders would not see the baby. 2 maids entered the room, and they looked rather mysterious. One of the servants could not resist shouting that new gifts had been sent for the girls again, and they were, of course, from Mr. Baldwin. A velvet box was placed on the table in front of Loretta and Melody. When the girl opened it, she saw 2 identical hairpins of a deep green color. In the center of each was decorated with a precious stone. And the morning in the Duke's office was again gloomy. The meeting continued, and the elders demanded that the man send at least the slave trader's daughter out of the palace. The man was playing the silent game again. Yes, Melody didn't pretend to be recognized as even a distant relative of the family, but he simply couldn't kick her out, because little Loretta wouldn't survive it. To make the elders ask fewer stupid questions and suggest stupid ideas, he gave them a clear answer. The man said that Melody was here at his request, and he entrusted her with one important matter. This answer made the older men even more angry. How dare he say such a thing? How could he let a criminal into his home and even trust her with things? The Duke would be laughed at in high society, but the man objected. She was not a guest here and far from being a servant. Besides, she was not guilty of anything. Otherwise, she would be behind bars. It was her mother who was involved in the kidnapping of children and the slave trade. The chief assessor frowned. He reminded them that there was no reason why low-grade, tainted blood should be found in the Baldwin family home. They had an impeccable reputation. Another elder added that Duke Baldwin was currently under the influence of emotions, and this is very bad because in that state it is easy to make strange and wrong decisions. Baldwin decided not to back down. He calmly replied that he was in his house, and here he would decide who would be allowed into his palace and who would not. Therefore, the final word was his. There was a soft knock at the door, and the butler Higgins appeared on the threshold. He bowed to those present and informed his master that news had just arrived from the main temple. The girls remained in the room. For some reason, they didn't want to go out for a walk. Melody asked the little girl if she had seen strange old men in the palace. She answered that yesterday they had been watching her from the side. In the evening, Melody told the girls to take her pillow and follow her. When the little girl asked where they were going, she answered that they urgently needed to visit one place. When they got out of the room, the girl asked the little girl to be as quiet as possible. No one should see them. She added that they were going to the safest place in the house. It seemed as if the entire palace had been dreaming for a long time. Only in one room was the light still on. This was, of course, Duke Baldwin's study. The man was not sleeping and was not even going to go to bed. He wandered from corner to corner and could not calm his thoughts. It seemed that everyone and everything was against him, but he had to stand firm and maintain his composure. Suddenly, there was a rustling sound behind the door and someone knocked on it. Who dares to disturb a man at such a late hour? He even got a little angry, but decided to open the door anyway because interest got the better of him. Little Loretta and Melody were standing near the door. The girl greeted him and said that they had come to the Duke for help and that he should help them because the girls had no one else to turn to. Melody asked him to protect Loretta. The Duke let the girls into the office, arranged hot tea for them, and sat Melody down opposite him and asked her to explain everything in order. From whom should he protect Loretta? The girl decided not to hide anything from Mr. Baldwin, so she said that Ronnie warned her about the danger. And now she behaves very carefully, but she is not afraid for herself. She is afraid for the baby. Melody knew perfectly well that there was no proof yet that Loretta was Baldwin's biological daughter, but he would find out. The first step had been taken. He had rescued her from the hands of a slave trader. While the Duke and Melody were talking, the little girl had already settled down on the wide bed and was watching them from the side. When she saw that the girl was about to leave, she became worried. Melody asked her not to worry. She was going to sleep in her chambers, and Loretta would stay here with the Duke, and in the morning they would see each other again. But the little girl refused. The bed was big, and Melody could stay. The Duke looked at this picture and thought that perhaps he shouldn't let Melody go. She should stay here. It would be safer for everyone, and Loretta would sleep peacefully. And the man also saw perfectly well how the little girl clung to Melody and tried to hold her. That's exactly why he needed to let the girl spend the night here. That way he would feel calmer for both of them. The little girl did not stand on ceremony for long when she heard the Duke's words of agreement that her nanny would spend the night with her. She quickly grabbed the Duke's blanket and wrapped it around her savior. And then the girl suddenly burst into tears. She thought about how she would soon grow up and have to sleep alone in her room. After all, big girls don't sleep with their nannies, but she doesn't want to be separated from Melody at all. The man looked at the little girl for a long time and could not understand who Loretta got her expression from. The girl had enough energy for 10 people, and in this she was completely different from the Duke. Then Melody remembered about the gifts. She got out of bed again, bowed to the Duke, and thanked him for the next surprises. The bows were really very beautiful, and Loretta was absolutely delighted with them. The Duke asked the girl how she knew that the gifts were sent from him. She replied that everything was very simple. The decorations in the room were made in the same style and color as the patterns on the letters and cards in the gifts. The man was very surprised. This girl is not as simple as she seems. She has impeccable aesthetic taste and is very observant, and this is not at all typical of commoners. Melody thought for a long time whether to tell the Duke this, but then she finally decided. She said that it was incredibly pleasant that Mr. Baldwin gave gifts not only to his daughter, but to her as well. It meant that he was a very kind person. He sat with the girls until they fell asleep. He was overwhelmed with emotion. He was constantly trying not to spoil anything by showing unnecessary emotions. But this time he had no doubt that he did not want to turn away from these children. In the morning, little Loretta was in full dress. It was a big day for her. The girl was heading to the main temple for the verdict. It was today that her fate was being decided. The chief elder was not in a good mood. He did not even try to hide it. The man was angry and taciturn. He probably had other plans for Loretta, but someone had very cleverly outplayed him. Melody watched the situation and smiled mysteriously. She saw the chief elder's irritation. Apparently, a couple of hours before the trip to the temple, he was very worried, not finding the girl in her room. Melody knew the plot of the novel very well, so it was not news to her that the elders decided to steal the girl from her room early in the morning, before she was supposed to go to the temple. The girl waved her hand at the departing carriage and exhaled calmly. It would all be over soon. The entire capital would know that the fact of Loretta's relationship with the Duke had been confirmed. Then the girl went to her room and decided to read a little. She also needed to calm her thoughts. But nothing worked. More than anyone in the world, she was waiting for good news from the temple. Soon Claude, who studies at the academy, and Jeremy, who grew up in the magic tower, will come to the Duke's house to greet their little sister. Then, probably, a real celebration will be held in the palace. Melody has chosen the role of a friend, nanny, and assistant for little Loretta. She will help the little girl avoid difficulties so that she can enjoy a wonderful life there. There was a noise near the door, and the girl thought that Mr. Higgins had come to tell news from the main temple. Melody swung the door open and froze. The chief elder was standing on the threshold. The man was displeased and seemed very angry. In a steely voice, he said that little Loretta was Duke Baldwin's biological daughter. That was what the main temple had said. The girl was very happy because she already knew the truth, but she did not understand whether it was possible to show her joy in front of this man. And he said that now Melody would get her payment and get out of here. The girl seemed to be in a real stupor, and the man continued. He assumed that Melody had come to this palace specifically for money. She knew everything and wanted to get more money. Melody tried to object. After all, it wasn't she who brought the girl to the palace. The Duke himself found her and took her with him at the request of the little girl, and now she was going to take care of Loretta. The elder did not stop. He decided to hurt Melody more. The man said with disgust that he understood why the Duke did not allow her to wash cups. He did not want even such work in his house to be done by a criminal. If she is not trusted with even the most basic work, for example, in the kitchen, then how can the Duke allow her to look after her own child? After all, this is absurd and will never happen. The next moment the man came close to the girl and brazenly tore the hairpin given to her by the Duke out of her hair. How dare this low-born woman wear such expensive things? The elder looked at the girl again and said that she looked quite sad, but he knew he could cheer her up. The next moment he handed Melody a bag of money. Then he grabbed the girl's hand and dragged her to the palace entrance. A carriage was already waiting there. He said that he had paid Melody and her services were no longer needed here. Despite the girl's cries that she did not want to leave, the man did not listen to her at all. On the contrary, he said that she had taken care of Loretta and now let her think about her own mother. Melody remembered her cruel and crazy mother. More than anything, she didn't want to meet that crazy woman again, but it seemed that life was preparing new trials for her. But then the situation changed in a matter of seconds. Mrs. Higgins appeared out of nowhere near the carriage. It was clear from the woman's appearance that she was very determined. The housekeeper asked the elder to take his hands off the girl. She then reminded the elder that he was a grown man and was behaving in such an inappropriate manner. In addition, he was also a guest in this house, so the Duke would not forgive him for such behavior. Then the woman turned to Melody, who was shaking with fear. She examined the girl and asked if she was okay. Then she advised her not to listen to this old madman. Then the housekeeper turned to the elder again. She called him a madman and asked him not to offer any more money to Mistress Melody. Not everything in this world can be decided with money. It's a pity he doesn't understand that. The man couldn't stand it. He swung his arm and hit Mrs. Higgins hard. She, not expecting this, fell to the ground. Melody tried to run to the woman and help her to her feet. But unfortunately, she didn't have time to do this. Someone's hand grabbed her arm painfully and pulled her towards itself. Then they covered her mouth so that Melody couldn't call for help. Then she was dragged into the carriage. At this time, the maids were cleaning the garden nearby. One of them heard some screams and strange fuss near the central entrance to the house. She thought it was the voice of Mrs. Melody. The curious maid Patty decided to check if everything was okay and headed towards the noise. And how scared she was when she saw the head housekeeper beaten and lying on the ground. The girl suddenly ran up with Mrs. Higgins and tried to help her get up from the ground. The woman in turn said that now they urgently need to find Duke Baldwin because the elder had stolen Melody. At this time, the carriage stopped at the gates of the city prison, where Melody's mother was being held. The elder led the girl inside the building. It was damp, dark, and smelled unpleasantly of dampness. They wandered for a long time through the dark corridors behind the guard until they stopped at one of the cells. Behind the bars sat a woman. She looked very frightening, and Melody did not immediately realize that this was her mother. The man kindly offered the girl to say hello to his mother. They hadn't seen each other for a long time. Melody probably missed her loved one very much. Why not hug her? Then the elder stated the conditions. If he paid monetary compensation for the damage to the Duke's family, he would make sure that they both left the capital in a matter of hours. The conditions were absolutely simple, and the girl understood them clearly. This man was interested in her staying away from the Duke, and most importantly, from his little daughter. At the mention of money, the villainess's eyes immediately lit up. The woman quickly approached the bars and asked her daughter if she really had brought money there to get her out of prison. A couple of hours ago, the verdict on the little girl Loretta was announced within the walls of the capital's main temple. The chief priest confirmed that the little girl is the legitimate daughter of the Duke. Immediately after the verdict was announced, little Loretta let out a loud sigh and immediately asked her father if she could go to Melody right away. She really missed her nanny. Returning to the castle, the Duke immediately went to his study. He had much to think about, and he wanted to do it alone. Now he needed to decide what to do next with Melody. But he didn't get to be alone. The elders burst into the room and reported that the girl had demanded money for her services, and having received it, quickly disappeared from the palace. The elders told the Duke in the most vivid colors about how vile the criminal's daughter really was, but the man did not believe a single word. He decided to check everything himself. Duke Baldwin said that he wanted to personally talk to the fugitive and ask her about everything in detail. She was probably still in the capital. Therefore, he wanted to hear from her personally about what had happened. The traitors did not expect such a turn of events. The men immediately began to persuade Baldwin to stay home and not start looking for the girl. She has the right to find her mother. No one can forbid her from doing so. One of the elders let it slip that Melody had probably gone to the central prison to see her mother. She planned to pay a ransom to free the woman and go back home with her. Another elder suggested that Melody was too young to be separated from her mother. She needed love and care herself, therefore they had no right to separate her from her loved one. The Duke was silent. He guessed that all this had been planned by the elders long ago. Melody herself could not have thought of such a thing. Besides, paying a ransom for release from prison was completely illegal. The persistent elder continued to convince the man that children quickly forget those they were close to. Besides, the elder had a granddaughter about the same age as Melody. She could play with Loretta. During the conversation, no one noticed how little Loretta had crept into the Duke's office. The girl screamed with resentment and indignation. She would never forget her Melody, and she would not remain here for a day without her nanny. In order to somehow correct the situation, the elders began to complain that no one was looking after the child in this house. How did the servants allow the girl to come to her father's office on her own? But then the head housekeeper followed Loretta into the office. Her face was scarred and she was limping. The woman said that she and Little Miss would like to speak to the Duke in private. At this time in prison, the chief elder was telling the thief that her daughter had received a huge sum for taking care of the Duke's daughter. Half of this sum would go to ransom the thief from prison. The man added that he had not planned to free the woman, but in this way he would be able to get rid of both at once. The mother and daughter must soon leave the capital and never return here again. The thief was once again convinced that this world is ruled exclusively by money. Her little silly daughter did the right thing for the first time in her life, received money from rich people, and now she really needs it. But Melody disappointed the elder and her mother. The girl said that she dropped the bag of money when strangers were pushing her into the carriage. Therefore, she has no money to ransom her mother. If the woman hadn't been behind bars, she would have probably tried to kill her daughter right there in prison. Why does this stupid slob always ruin everything? She lost her chance to get out of prison. Even the guard, watching this conversation from the side, laughed. So stupid that he trusted a huge amount of money to a small child. The man is already old and is definitely losing his grip. Probably all the heavenly powers at that moment helped Melody to correct the situation and punish the scoundrels. The ransom did not take place, since the elder did not have enough money. At this point the elder intervened and said that the sinners must be punished. The man looked at Melody with an unpleasant look, and she realized that he and the guard were also going to leave her behind bars. And so it happened. The guard painfully pushed the girl into the prison cell and slammed the bars behind her. She had many chances to save herself today, but none of them worked. Now she is in prison with her mother. There was a moment of silence, and in this silence, clear, loud steps were heard. Then, in the dark corridor, a silhouette of a man appeared. A few seconds later, the Duke was already standing next to the guard. He had a sword in his hands. Melody saw that the man was very determined. Indeed, Baldwin told the guard to take his hands off the bars or he would simply chop them off. The guard simply sat down on the ground out of fear. The head housekeeper appeared behind the Duke. In a split second, the woman pulled the girl out of the cell and hugged her. In her eyes there was something between worry for Melody and hatred for the elder. The elder was simply indignant. How could this half-breed continue to stay in his house? He would never allow it. But no one listened to the man. Mrs. Higgins treated the wounds, and the Duke simply remained silent. A few minutes later, Baldwin ordered the housekeeper to return to the carriage, and he needed to talk a little with the slave trader and her daughter. He needed to find out some information. As the woman left the prison, the Duke leaned over to Melody and apologized for what the girl had to endure today. He apologized for not having foreseen such a turn of events. A minute later, the man pulled out of his pocket the same bag of money that the elder had offered her. He handed it to the girl, saying that she had dropped the money near the palace. The man said that he had no right to keep her in the palace by force and she could go home. But then little Loretta would cry at night, and the butler and the housekeeper would be upset. After a pause, the man quietly added that he himself would be sad that she would leave. He had gotten used to her. With her arrival, life in the palace had changed significantly for the better. Suddenly, a voice was heard from the cell. The thief ordered her daughter not to listen to the Duke. With the money he gives her, they can live comfortably in any city in the country. She cannot leave her mother. The woman did not repent at all, but promised that she would treat the girl better when she was free. She would give her more food and buy her clothes more often. She did not promise to become an ideal mother at all. The slave trader kept her eyes on the bag. She was not interested in anything else. So she asked her daughter what coins were inside, silver or whether the Duke had paid in gold. The next second, the girl couldn't stand it any longer. She threw the bag of coins right at her mother's feet. The money scattered, and the thief immediately began to collect them. They were gold. At that moment, Melody realized that the woman didn't give a damn about her. All her mother cared about was gold. She would never change. She would always put money first. A guard approached the prisoner and ordered her to hand over the bag. "You can't use gold in prison. Besides, you can't buy anything with it here, and apparently no one is going to release the woman." Melody couldn't watch it any longer. She was terribly ashamed that such a woman was her mother. So the girl turned around and quickly, without explanation, headed for the exit. After the Duke had already left the prison walls and approached the carriage, Melody decided to apologize. She left the prison walls without permission, practically ran away. But the man was not offended. The man smiled for the first time in a long time. He extended his hand to the girl and suggested that they return to the palace immediately. Little Loretta had been waiting for them there for a long time. Before the carriage had time to appear on the alley near the palace, little Loretta was already running out of the house. She really hoped that her father had managed to find the words and convince Melody to come back. The meeting turned out to be very emotional. The little girl immediately threw herself into the arms of her favorite nanny and part-time friend and almost burst into tears. The Duke watched all this from the side and smiled. After the joyful meeting, Melody went to her room. A doctor was called to her, who examined all the wounds and made compresses. It seemed that everything fell into place and a happy life awaited her. After the doctor left, there was a soft knock on the girl's door, and Loretta appeared on the threshold. She brought Melody some delicious candies and her favorite toy. Then the girl started hugging again. It seemed that she couldn't spend an hour without Melody, and the girl in turn was happy that the little girl started smiling again, so she did everything right. Duke Baldwin decided to do some work in his office. He called the butler to report on how Melody and, most importantly, the housekeeper were feeling. The man replied that everything was more or less normal. Then Baldwin opened the letter that was lying on his desk. He ran his eyes over the lines and asked the butler to clean the guest room. A few days later, his eldest son Claude returned to the palace. The next morning, the maid noticed that little Loretta was sad for some reason. When she asked the girl what had happened, she replied that they had told her at the temple that she and the Duke were now a family, and they would always be together. But the question is different. What to do with Melody? After all, Loretta loves her very much, but this girl is not her family, so she cannot stay here forever. So her older brother told her. Now, if Melody were a daughter too, then everything would be much easier. She would officially call her her sister. Maybe it would be possible to somehow make the girl become a member of their family. After talking to the little mistress, the maid discussed the situation with her colleague. They decided that the only way for Melody to become related to the Duke was to marry his son. The girls chatted and didn't notice that Loretta was listening to their conversation from around the corner. A second later, she was already thanking the maids for the wonderful idea. Now she had to act. Melody gradually got used to her new life. Everything here was unusual for her. She was not used to luxury, wealth, and expensive things. And she also felt uncomfortable asking the servants for something. Therefore, the girl tried to do everything herself. Melody had time to take care of more than just little Loretta. She was kind to absolutely everyone in the palace. When the housekeeper had a headache, Melody did all the housework for the woman. One morning, the girl came to ask Mrs. Higgins how she was feeling. The woman had just woken up, but had already managed to tell the girl the main news. The Duke's son, young Mr. Claude, was arriving tomorrow. The woman said she was feeling a little unwell. If the young gentleman came and wanted some tea, Melody was to prepare and serve him the drink. The woman would be very grateful to her for that. The girl's eyes widened. She knew how to make tea, but what if the young gentleman didn't like it? The housekeeper reassured her, saying that she had already spoken to the Duke and that everything would go well. Melody breathed a sigh of relief. She couldn't let Mrs. Higgins down, and it would be rude to refuse to help this woman. She was a guest here for now and had to behave appropriately. Suddenly the girl really wanted to hug this woman. Maybe because she doesn't have her own children, she cares about Melody so much, and now she calms her down and gives valuable instructions. The next morning was gloomy and rainy. A carriage drove up to the palace and a handsome young man stepped out. The butler met him at the threshold of the house and greeted him. He was glad to see Claude. The butler looked the boy up and down and said that he had grown a lot and looked better. Now he resembled his father even more. The boy even became a little embarrassed. Entering the house, the fetus looked around. He hadn't been here for many years, but inside nothing had changed. The boy immediately began asking about his younger brother and sister. It was still early morning and they were probably asleep. Mr. Higgins said that there was another person in the palace besides Loretta and Ronnie. He wanted to introduce the boy to her. The butler thought that they would get along very well. When Melody came out of her room and decided to take a walk before breakfast, she saw a young guy in the garden playing with little Loretta. It was obvious that he was simply glowing with happiness. And the guy was very happy to see his little sister. Claude Baldwin was a real handsome man and looked very much like his father. He was the most well-mannered and polite young man in the capital, and now Melody understood that this was not an exaggeration. The novel said that the Duke's eldest son had outstanding abilities and an insanely attractive appearance, and it also said that his love for Loretta was boundless. He was the perfect older brother. The guy saw the stranger and immediately guessed that this was the same mysterious guest. He approached the girl, bowed, and introduced himself. Melody noticed that he looked even better up close. This is exactly how the girl imagined Claude when she read the novel. She imagined what her life could be like in a similar family. This served as a consolation for her in difficult moments of life. An awkward moment of silence followed. The girl did not know how to behave with the Duke's son, so she lowered her head and looked at her feet so that the guy would not see how red her cheeks were. It was Claude who broke the silence. He asked if the girl was okay, or maybe he looked somehow wrong, since she couldn't look him in the eyes. There was nothing left to do but raise my head and look the guy straight in the eyes. He smiled broadly and said that he was very pleased to meet his father's guest. He liked her very much. Melody thought that she couldn't be more stupid than she looked now. The girl didn't know what to answer the young man, so she just smiled. How handsome he was. She used to be in love with this character. Little Loretta saved the situation. She saw the young people and quickly headed towards them. Coming closer, she shouted that she had been looking for Melody for a long time and had already missed her. The girl was afraid that the sun had already managed to fry the baby's head. She quickly put a hat on her. But then Loretta said that she loved her nanny very much and wanted to marry her. There was another pause, but then Melody thought that the girl had heard too many stories from the maids and was just joking, so she hugged the little girl tightly and said that she loved her very much too. Then Melody turned her gaze to the guy. He was standing and watching the situation carefully. The girl remembered that in the novel he was a terrible, jealous man. He was worried about anyone who was heading towards little Loretta. An hour later, the girl stood in front of Claude's room door. She had a tray with a tea set in her hands. As agreed with the housekeeper, she made tea for the guy. Yesterday, she was happy that she would be able to help Mrs. Higgins. But today, standing at the young man's door, she was afraid. How would she be able to look into those devilishly beautiful eyes again? While she was trying to convince herself to gather her thoughts and knock on the door, it suddenly opened and Claude appeared behind the door. The guy smiled and invited the girl inside. Melody was worried that the young man would take the little girl's words about wanting to marry her nanny too seriously. He would probably ask why Loretta said that. The guy really started asking questions. He heard that the girl wanted to learn the manners of high society. Why would she want to do that? Did she want to be closer to little Loretta? Or was there some other important reason? Melody confirmed that the Duke's daughter is the main reason. She loves the baby as if she were her little sister, or as if she were her own daughter, so she wants to stay close to her as long as possible. Hearing these words from Melody, the guy's face immediately changed, said that he had urgent business and slammed the door right in front of Melody's nose. She shouldn't have told him about it. For several days in a row, the guy openly ignored Melody, or simply avoided meeting her. So one morning, the girl decided to make tea again and take it to his room. The guy took the drink and closed the door behind him. But the girl did not despair. Someday she would still manage to gain the young master's favor. Life in the Duke's house was so happy that she forgot how much everyone hated her here. Time passed, and Melody continued to be embarrassed at the sight of the Duke's son. He always behaved politely with her and did not show that he disliked her. Or maybe he did. Returning to the house, the girl heard strange cries in the living room. The Duke and several members of the servants were there. When asked what had happened, Baldwin, without explanation, asked her to go to her room. Melody noticed the strange men who were almost fighting. Mr. Higgins explained that he was a charlatan, and the Duke, as everyone knows, hates scoundrels and deceivers. Melody thought for a few minutes. If the Duke did not like lies, then his son did not welcome liars either. And she was deceiving him, saying that she wanted to learn aristocratic manners. So the next morning, the girl brought Claude tea and confessed that she was not interested in high society, and in fact did not want to learn manners. She did not even have any acquaintances in those circles. But to the girl's surprise, the guy said that good manners are not only for aristocrats, therefore she should not worry so much. And the guy also thanked her for her honesty. The girl also admitted that she thought that Lot hated her. That's why she brought him tea every morning, hoping to fix this stupid situation and please the Duke's son. After these words, the guy looked at the girl attentively and, again without answering, slammed the door in front of her again. Well, he definitely doesn't like Melody, and there's nothing he can do about it. Absolutely, all the maids in the palace envied the young guest. After all, only she has the opportunity to bring tea to the young master directly to his room. She can talk to him and also admire his unearthly beauty. The girl reacted calmly to this. From the outside, it looked exactly like that, but the maids did not know what Melody was really chatting about with Claude and how he felt about her. The next morning, the girl knocked on the young gentleman's door for a long time, but he did not open. He was probably not in the room, so she decided to quietly open the door and leave the tray on the table. As soon as she reached for the door handle, the door swung wide open and a young gentleman appeared on the threshold. He seemed to be in a bad mood. Melody dropped the teapot in surprise. The dishes flew up, but no one managed to catch them. Besides, there was boiling water inside. Melody tried to prevent the inevitable, but she couldn't. She slipped and flew after the kettle. Claude reacted instantly at that moment and tried to cover the girl's face with his hands so that she wouldn't get burned by the hot water. Or worse, she could get hurt by the shards. The kettle shattered into pieces. The guy hovered over Melody, trying to protect her from harm. She was terribly scared that the young man had burned or cut himself because of her. So the girl began to apologize. She suddenly thought that she might be accused of trying to harm the Duke's son. He might complain about her to his father, and then she would certainly be sent to prison with her wicked mother. But despite all Melody's fears, Claude stood up and helped her up from the floor. Then he examined her carefully and asked if she was hurt. The girl shook her head and continued to ask for forgiveness. The guy understood perfectly well that Melody was very worried, so he tried to calm her down. Panic never helps solve problems, and this situation can't even be called a problem. Next, Claude asked the girl to close her eyes and ears, and then she needed to slowly inhale and start counting to 100. In this way, her nervous system would come to a calm state. She obeyed and quietly counted to 100, closing her ears and eyes. The guy sat quietly next to her and did not make a sound. Several minutes passed and Melody ended the strange session. The young man looked at the girl again with a smile and asked if she felt better. She answered that she had almost calmed down, but still felt very guilty before Claude. Claude also decided to apologize. It was his fault that the girl almost got scalded by boiling water. After all, it was he who opened the door too abruptly and almost knocked Melody off her feet. He had already gotten used to the fact that the girl brought tea at the same time. Therefore, not seeing her at the appointed time, he decided to go and find out where his tea was. Melody was standing at the door at that time. And the guy also said that he is insanely jealous of his little sister towards Melody. They spend so much time together, and the little girl probably loves the girl more than her own brother. This was not exactly, or rather not entirely, what the young man wanted to say, but whatever one might say, Melody was surprised by his sincerity. It turns out that rich people can be honest too. Claude checked the girl's hands again for cuts, and when he was sure she was okay, he smiled broadly. He was glad they were able to talk. The next moment, the guy leaned right up to Melody's ear and quietly asked if he could ask her for something in return. Melody was even confused, thinking that Claude was going to go and kiss her. But it was a false alarm. The guy simply asked her to come to his room as before and bring her delicious tea. He had already gotten used to such a pleasant ritual, and he really liked the drink. Claude's arm healed in 2 days. Now he let the girl into his room and asked her to help him with his work. While Melody looked for various information for him, he drank tea and discreetly watched the girl. One morning, the Duke's son asked Melody and you about the travel arrangements of the recently arrived members of the Duke's family. He needed copies of these documents. Melody had no idea why the boy was doing them. They worked until the evening. And even though the relationship between the young people had improved, Melody still considered the Dek a big villain and a thief of girls' hearts. She asked the guy many times why he needed the lists of arriving guests. Noglot always kept silent or said that it was a big secret. She did not understand what the young man had planned and how it would affect her. Walking down the corridor, completely absorbed in her thoughts, Melody did not notice a man coming towards her. Before she could raise her head, she painfully bumped into the elbow of this strange man. What was he doing here at such a late hour? This man turned out to be one of the elder's subordinates. He always looked angry and thoughtful. On the day of his arrival in the capital, he called Melody the daughter of a slave trader, which offended her greatly. The man looked down on the girl and, without saying anything, simply walked on. And she convinced herself that there was no need to be afraid of the elders. They could not offend her in any way, because she was the Duke's guest. Melody slowly headed to her room, but the maid caught up with her and said that Milord had been waiting for her in his office for a long time. There was nothing to do, so she had to turn around and go to the office again. The Duke was already tired of waiting for her. On his desk stood a beautiful gift box containing the very same green velvet brooch he had given the girl days earlier. It turned out that he had forced the elder to return the decoration. Melody was overjoyed that her favorite bow brooch had returned to her. She thanked the Duke with all her heart and bowed before the man. He noticed the ink on her sleeves and asked where it came from. The girl immediately blushed. The last thing she needed was for Baldwin to think she was a slob. Melody explained that she had gotten dirty while writing, and she had written a lot that day, having spent almost the entire day in the study with Mr. Claude. Baldwin smiled sadly. Few people would be pleased to look at the girl in front of the pack in ink, but no one probably taught her to understand this. Her mother did not care about her at all, but she will definitely learn good manners here. Besides, the girl is very kind and constantly apologizes for every little thing. Besides, Melody takes very good care of Loretta. The man took the brooch from the box and placed it in the girl's palms. He said that important guests often came to their house, so she should always look good, and the brooch would complement her image. Having said goodbye to the Duke, Melody headed to her room. But the girl wasn't even going to go to bed. She had one very urgent matter. She needed to prevent one unpleasantness. She knew from the novel that the elders would try to ruin little Loretta's entire wardrobe. So Melody wanted to make sure that this incident didn't happen. She had to act now. She had to watch every night. If the elder showed up, she would scream at the top of her lungs. But it wasn't the elders who showed up, it was young Master Claude, who clearly scared the girl. And what should the guy think when he saw Melody near his sister's closet at night? It's full of expensive things. It's very suspicious that the girl is trying to get in there. Melody pictured this picture and immediately screamed that she was not a thief and had not stolen anything from the little lady's wardrobe. Claude would definitely think that was exactly what she wanted to do. The situation was so stupid that Claude couldn't help but laugh. He asked the girl to calm down. The guy wouldn't even think that she wanted to steal one of his sister's dresses. The Duke's son understood that the girl had no need for little Loretta's dress. She never left the palace and had nowhere to wear luxurious clothes. Besides, Melody herself had a pretty good wardrobe. If she had wanted to steal anything, it certainly wouldn't have been the embroidered dresses. Perhaps she would have targeted the Duke's jewelry, such as his precious ring. The guy asked what the girl was doing outside the dressing room door in the middle of the night. It was pretty weird. And what was Melody supposed to tell him? She couldn't tell him what she knew was going to happen next in the Duke's house. The guy thought about it. She accidentally saw their assistants gathered together, accidentally sensed something was wrong, and decided to come listen to them. Then accidentally found out that they were up to no good? He looked at the girl again and asked her to run away immediately if she felt something was wrong. She always needed to tell adults about problems, but only those she could rely on. Claude asked Melody to go to her room and go to bed quietly. He was an adult, she had told him everything, and now the young Duke would take care of everything. Melody grinned. How could he be an adult if he was only 15 years old? But the girl thanked the guy sweetly and went to her room. Now he would take care of Loretta. Melody stood in the middle of the hallway and couldn't move, so Claude took her hand and said that he would take the girl to the room himself and help her sleep soundly. He knew a surefire way. Melody blushed again. Why did she always feel ashamed and uncomfortable around this guy? How was he going to help her fall asleep quickly? As it turned out, a few minutes later, the guy just cooked it for her with honey. After such a drink, any person would immediately want to dive under the blanket and have a sweet sleep. Melody was no exception. The young men got to talking. The young woman asked why Claude was wearing a formal suit in the middle of the night. He replied that he was attending a social event instead of Duke Baldwin. The guy then went on to say that starting tomorrow he would ask the butler to tighten up security considerably. Melody shouldn't worry about little Loretta. Everything would be under control. Melody seemed to hang for a few minutes looking at the young Duke. He is so handsome and also very organized and brave. Claude resolved the situation and dealt with the problem within an hour. He does everything confidently and with a sense of purpose. It looks very adult. And now the girls don't think at all that Claude is just a teenager. His actions and deeds are very adult. Melody finished her milk, thanked Claude for the treat and the time he spent on her, and went to her room. She didn't know if she would be able to sleep, but at least her soul was very warm and calm. Well done, smiled to herself again. The evening had been quite pleasant. She had managed to chat with Claude. It turned out he was really very nice, just like in the novel. The guy wished her good night and asked her not to be late for class tomorrow morning. She still had a lot to learn to feel relaxed in high society. Claude went on to say that he understood perfectly well that he was handsome. But Melody, you shouldn't stare at him so intently. It looks rather strange from the outside. The girl blushed even more. Without saying a word, Melody left the kitchen and headed to her room. Inside, she was simply indignant. How could Claude say such words out loud and right to her face? Opening the door of her room, she thought that, no matter how evil the Duke's son was, he really helped her in many things today. He even found a way to make her sleep. Entering the room, the young lady froze in place in surprise and fear. Her things were scattered on the floor, and the beautiful brooch that the Duke had given her was torn to shreds. Beautiful green ribbons lay among the rubbish. It became very painful, and suddenly she wanted to cry. The girl picked up the velvet ribbon and squeezed it in her hands. So the elders guessed that she was watching the wardrobe, so they decided to take advantage of the moment and ruin all her things. She stood for a while in the middle of her room and among the scattered things, but then she decided that she would not be too upset. She had been a target for other people's anger before, so this situation would not break her. The next day, the castle hosted a reception for very influential and famous guests. Everyone was bustling about all day. She was afraid to leave her room. She decided not to attract unnecessary attention to herself. As they said goodbye, some of the guests asked if the Duke would make rash decisions. If word got around that he had taken in a child of low birth, his family would be made fun of. But the Duke seemed cool and calm that day. So he asked in a calm tone who would be so bold as to make fun of the Baldwin family. Until that day, no one had been found. One of the elders said that the aristocrats from the capital could easily afford such a thing, to which Baldwin replied that he did not consider their opinion authoritative for himself. He was not afraid of anyone, so he would do what he considered necessary. The second elder said that he was worried about the Duke, so he considered it necessary to express his opinion. After all, who would help Baldwin solve problems if not the elders? The man should listen to them and send the daughter of the criminal out of the palace. And what was the surprise of all the guests when the criminal's daughter suddenly came out into the hall and calmly greeted everyone. Those present opened their mouths in surprise, and the elders frowned. Now the elders had reason to worry. After all, the girl had that very same hairpin made of dark green velvet in her hair. How could this have happened? After all, only last night they had ruined this decoration. One of the attackers shouted loudly for her to know her place. She lives here by the kindness of the Duke and has no right to speak like that. And why does she look at everyone so haughtily? The main housekeeper quickly stood in front of the girl and asked her to hide behind her. You never know what these shameless elders can do. Let everyone calm down a little. If this were a normal family, Melody would never have listened to Mrs. Higgins's advice. She might not even have come here. But this is not the situation. She is angrier than ever. Melody remembered Claude's words. He taught her to always stay calm and not to panic. It irritates enemies and sometimes even scares them. So she will act. Melody's face at that moment was completely expressionless. There was no anger, joy, or panic on it. The girl seemed absolutely calm. Her movements were precise, and her voice was even and confident. Everyone froze in anticipation. One of the elders approached her and began to shout that she was not a simple daughter of a criminal. She was even worse, and everyone was sure that she had sneaked into the Duke's house to carry out a wicked plan. Another elder shouted that such suspicious individuals in the palace must be disposed of. Nothing good can be expected from her. Her presence here is undesirable and will harm the Duke's reputation. But then Baldwin himself stepped forward. He stood in front of the girl, thus blocking her from the crowd. Then the man asked everyone to calm down and be quiet. You can't attack a guest without having a good reason for it. At this point, Melody grabbed the brooch and pulled it off. She said that she knew the situation she was in, but she would never ruin a gift from the man who had so kindly taken her into his home. Then she took the velvet ribbon in her hands and showed it to those present, so everyone could see that the decoration was ruined, and it was clearly not the girl who ruined it. The elders quieted down a bit, but then started up again. One of them said that it was Melody who had damaged the jewelry. It wouldn't have happened if the girl had been watching him. But Melody looked the man straight in the eye and said that she would never have thought that a grown, respectable man could sneak into a girl's room to ruin her beau. The man was literally burning with rage. His face had turned dark red and his eyes seemed to be popping out of their sockets. He realized that at this moment, his crime could be revealed. Hearing all this, the Duke approached Melody and sat down next to her. Then he asked if everything was okay with the girl. It was his fault that he had not kept an eye on her and allowed this to happen. Then the man turned to his guests and asked in a sharp voice who among those present could allow themselves to offend his guest in such a way. He would definitely find out who this person was, and then the doors of this house would be closed to him forever. It's not enough that she took the man by the hand and asked him not to be angry. This situation is too stupid to devote so much time and energy to it. Someone simply harbored a childish grudge against her. Now she is absolutely calm. She is not hurt and has not lost anything, and the damaged brooch is not a problem. It can be restored. So there is no need to punish anyone because of it. And then the Duke understood the girl's train of thought. She was simply trying to make the stupid elders remain in his debt. Debt is one of the ways to control people, and this girl knew this fact well, but it was unclear where from. But still, the man was very grateful to her for such an act. The Duke turned to the guests and said that only those equal to him in status could remain in this house. Therefore, he asked the men to leave his palace immediately. At this point, the conversation ended. The elders were in deep shock. They didn't even know what to do now. How could they throw such respectable people out of the house? What would the other elders say? They wouldn't give Baldwin any peace. But it seems the Duke himself didn't care about the reaction of these evil deceivers. He said that if the men themselves did not leave his house, he would help them do so, but in a more rude form. And in just a few minutes, the carriage with the guests rushed away from Duke Baldwin's house. This is how to treat people who interfere in a man's personal life and the life of his family. In the evening, Mrs. Higgins came to Melody's bedroom to help her fix her favorite velvet bow. The woman said that she fully supported Mr. Baldwin's actions. This is exactly how you should deal with mean guests. An hour later, the brooch looked almost like new. The girl was incredibly grateful to the woman for her help. She constantly supports her in difficult times and always tries to help. You could say that she replaces her mother. The girl was about to go to bed when there was a quiet but insistent knock on the door. Who could it be at such an hour? It must have been little Loretta asking to sleep in the bed with the girl. Melody had no doubt that it was Loretta who stood at the door, but when she opened it, she was very scared. Claude was standing at the threshold. He was smiling awkwardly and asking for forgiveness if he had woken her. It turned out that the guy came to check how the girl was feeling. He saw that at the reception she tried to appear cheerful and carefree, but Claude understood perfectly well that Melody was just pretending. During the appointment, Loretta also observed the girl and told her brother that her nanny looked very sad and worried. That's why she asked him to visit her. Both he and his sister want to support her. Melody burst into tears at these words and sat down by the door. Claude didn't lose his head, pulled out his handkerchief and handed it to the girl. She burst into tears even more. How could he be so sweet? She tried her best to calm down and start talking normally, but the conversation was not going well, so Melody asked the guy if Loretta had fallen asleep yet. Claude was silent for a minute, then said that everything was fine with his sister, but he would really like for a girl to call him by his name at least once. He would be incredibly pleased. The girl cried so much that she started to hiccup. Claude started to laugh at her kindly because it looked so cute. She, in turn, became incredibly excited and blushed. Suddenly, Claude said that he missed his little sister madly and wanted to go visit her, and Loretta probably missed Melody madly, so they should go visit her together. The girl immediately agreed, but walking along the corridor, she noticed that they were not heading in the direction of little Loretta's room. But the guy calmed her down and asked her not to worry. He was taking her to a wonderful place. They walked a little more and stopped at one of the doors. The guy opened it and let the girl in, and she froze in surprise and admiration. The room was truly wonderful and very unusual. After a few minutes of being there, Claude finally realized that Melody had found herself in a library for the first time in her life. She had never been to such a place before, so she couldn't get over her admiration. The young woman looked around the room a little more and then finally asked why they had come here. Claude reminded her that he was a stenographer and would now give the girl a job. She in turn jokingly said that he was a liar and she hated him. The guy reassured her that the work was very small. They would do everything and then go to Loretta. It was a little strange. Claude always left his notes in his office and never went to the library, but for some reason they would work here. But the girl decided not to bother with these thoughts now. Claude, in turn, never tired of watching the girl and admiring her. There was something about her that others didn't have, but he couldn't figure out what it was yet. He asked Melody to come to the desk. There was a thick book in a beautiful red palette on the table. It immediately attracted the girl's attention because Melody had already worked with it. The guy opened it and went to the right page and asked the girl to put today's date. Without thinking, she walked up to the table and picked up the pen. When you sign a book, you always feel as if it becomes your property. Melody felt as if she was being given a gift. The boy said that this was a very important book. The Duke thought that shorthand was an important thing. Records of the achievements of outstanding people who changed the era would be useful for teaching materials. But Melody reminded that she only wrote weather notes in this book and also made some sketches. Claude replied that the weather is especially important. It affects many things in this life. The guy also said that he was not gifted enough to influence the epoch in any way. The documents were carefully sorted by place and time, but one day such a person would appear and change the course of history. Claude understood perfectly well that it was necessary to carefully organize all the records of the history of the past. Surely they would be useful for future generations. Otherwise, how would people know their history? The guy handed the book to the girl and asked her to put it on the far shelf. That's where a place had been prepared for it. Melody immediately complied with the request and put the book on the shelf. Then the guy asked her if she knew that when someone does research, they use other people's notes as a reference, and at the end of the work, there will be a note that the research used the materials of Miss Melody from the family of Duke Baldwin. The girl's mouth dropped open in surprise. How could that be? After all, she was not a member of Duke Baldwin's family, but Claude assured her that it was written down and kept in the notebook, which meant it was true. And this also directly indicates that Melody must definitely marry a member of the Baldwin family, and he is incredibly happy about this fact and does not even hide it. Melody looked like a tomato again. She wasn't red, but rather purple. The guy said that it was all Loretta's idea, but the girl reminded him that someone like her couldn't marry into the Duke's family. Well, the young man said that no one cares what a person's background is. The main thing is love, and everything else is nonsense. Or maybe she doesn't love little Loretta. Melody assured the guy that she was madly in love with the Duke's daughter and was ready to do absolutely anything for her. She would really like to stay in the palace longer to take care of the girl. But then the girl froze. What were they even talking about? It was absurd. You can't marry a girl? Loretta would definitely find some gentleman she would fall in love with. Claude looked at his interlocutor carefully. He had a feeling more and more that the girl knew what would happen to them in the future, but Melody said that was nonsense. Then the young people went to little Loretta's room to read her a bedtime story. The girl was incredibly happy to see them both, so she rushed to hug first Melody and then her brother. Then the girl quietly asked her nanny if she had received a gift from her brother. Claude asked her to wait in the room as he was preparing a gift for Melody. The little girl probably meant the notebook as a gift from the young Duke. He started talking about marriage and preservation magic so suddenly that she didn't really understand anything. The book is now protected by a spell and sits on the shelf. Little Loretta approached the girl again and asked her again if she liked the gift. Claude stood aside and pretended to be busy with something and not to hear the conversation of the two girls. Melody had no choice but to admit that she was really happy with the gift from the guy. The girl smiled and tried her best not to show that she was a little worried about the situation. The little girl hugged Melody tightly and said that if she was happy, then the girl was doubly happy for her. Now everything will be very good, even wonderful, if only time would stop and everything would remain as it is today. The day before, Duke Baldwin said that Melody absolutely needed status. Otherwise, they could lose her. As it turned out, many rich people want to adopt the girl and are ready to pay huge amounts of money for it. Therefore, it is necessary to come up with a formal way that would allow the girl to officially remain in the Duke's house. After all, many want to adopt the girl precisely in order to have control over the Duke. Baldwin was already thinking about adopting Melody. It would be the safest option. But then Ronnie objected and said that he would never become this girl's brother. The butler also suggested becoming Melody's official sponsor. This could also work, but the issue is sensitive, so don't rush and think it over carefully. The Duke also remembered that the date of the slave trader's execution was already known, and he needed to somehow tell the girl about it. But the man had no idea how to do it. It would be a heavy blow for her. Butler Higgins listened to the man and reminded him that every prisoner has the right to a last wish. Melody's mother is no exception. She asked to arrange a last meeting with her daughter. There was no point in delaying it any further, so in the morning, Baldwin invited Melody to his place and told her about her mother's execution and that the slave trader wanted to see her daughter before she died. Baldwin also reminded that this is the woman's last request, but if Melody does not want to see her mother, then he will understand and take care of it. After all, no one can force her to fulfill such a request. The girl felt incredibly sad. Why did she have such a stupid fate? She had to make very difficult decisions. Other girls her age were talking about princes and beautiful dresses. She was more than sure that her mother would not even think of asking her for forgiveness. She would not lighten the weight of her sins. And this was very painful for Melody. The woman does not want to see her daughter, but to calm herself down. The slave trader understands perfectly well that there may not be life after death. Therefore, she is interested in seeing her daughter and asking her about her life with the Duke, and giving some terrible advice. The girl was very grateful to the man that he did not impose his opinion on her and did not put pressure on her. He allowed her to think a little and give an answer the next morning. He would support her in any case. Melody told the man that the last time they met, she realized that her mother never loved her and didn't even try to hide it. The girl tried to be the perfect daughter, but she didn't appreciate it. Back then, in prison, the slave trader looked at her daughter as if she were a gold sack of money, and nothing else. Her eyes were burning with the fire of profit, and there was no love for us at all. So what will change this time? Her mother treated her more or less normally, only in rare cases when she managed to cheat someone out of a very large sum of money. But even in such moments, she never hugged Melody. Even if this criminal gave her everything that mothers give their daughters, it wouldn't save the situation at all, and Melody wouldn't be any happier because of it. She'd suffered for too long. So Melody decided she wouldn't think about it until the morning. She was giving her answer now. She didn't want to meet her mother. After all, the woman had never really considered her daughter. The man thanked her for her answer and said that she had done the right thing by choosing herself. No need to hurt her feelings again. She had made an adult decision, which some people think about for months. He admired this sweet and bright girl more and more. She is very strong in spirit, and probably this helps her to endure all the pain and suffering that fate has prepared for her. Melody said she wanted to sign the prison visitation waiver in person. That would give her further assurance that she had made the right decision. Plus, she knew how to do it. Baldwin thought that even he was not as strong-willed as this fragile girl, so he promised to prepare all the necessary documents by the morning and send them to prison. In the morning, Melody went to the prison to hand in papers refusing to see her mother before her execution. Baldwin was supposed to go with her, but when she got into the carriage, she saw Claude. The girl was surprised and asked where the Duke was. The guy replied that he was fine, but that his father was feeling a little unwell. Besides, there were too many urgent matters to attend to in the palace. Melody thought that the Duke was probably too tired of the constant reproaches of the elders and the constant attention of the public. It was very difficult for him to always appear strong and self-confident. She told the guy that it was all her fault. It was because of her that the Duke felt bad. After all, if she had not stayed in this palace, then no one would have bothered the man and everything would have been fine with him. But Claude tried to calm her down. He said that the girl shouldn't even think about such things. The Duke is a grown man and knows perfectly well what he's doing and why, and Claude is going with her just to support her. Suddenly, the guy asked Melody when her birthday was. He didn't even know what month or season suited her. The girl thought for a moment and then blushed. She didn't know her birthday. The guy felt awkward. He asked without thinking, although he couldn't know that the girl didn't know her date of birth. Melody smiled and answered that she was born in the spring. She then admitted that she really didn't know the exact date, and her mother had never mentioned it. So she chose the day when the yellow spring flowers began to bloom. Half an hour later, the carriage stopped at the central gate of the city prison. The coachman informed Claude that they had arrived. The girl's heart began to pound wildly. She did not even understand what this excitement was about. Claude handed the guards some documents, and the men studied them for a long time. Some time passed, and the papers were returned to the young Duke, saying that the check was over. They were allowed inside the building. One of the guards was looking very persistently inside the carriage, and although he was wearing a helmet, the girl clearly saw his angry eyes. Claude was indignant. How can you hire people with such behavior as guards? But then the boy took off his helmet, and the girl saw Isaiah in front of her. He was the son of the doctor's lady, who went to study at the School of Knights. The meeting was unexpected, but pleasant. They spent a lot of time together as children, and the boy was always trying to protect Melody from the evil kids who tried to hurt the girl. You could say he was her loyal friend and protector. Many people wanted to make fun of Melody as a child, because she was the daughter of a criminal, and although the slave trader herself always looked expensive and magnificent, her daughter always looked like a ragamuffin. She was often humiliated, called a half-breed, a poor girl and a ragamuffin, and the girl was in incredible pain, but she could not do anything then. Melody simply endured and waited for better times. Only Isaiah always treated her with special warmth. He even stole food from the house to feed the girl, who always lived half-starved. If it weren't for this boy, who knows what would have happened to Melody? He often beat up children because they were hurting his girlfriend, and Melody always asked him not to do that. She didn't want to hurt others just because they hurt her. As the years passed, Isaiah and Melody's friendship only grew stronger. She often noticed that the boy would look at her for a long time, and a smile would play on his face. He probably liked the girl. Now Melody remembered that since childhood the boy wanted to become a knight. And although Mrs. Merlin dreamed that her son would become a doctor, he did not listen to his mother. A few years later, Isaiah went to the capital, specifically to the School of Knights. So now Melody hugged her old faithful friend tightly. She was so happy to see him again. He had grown a lot, and of course he had changed. He had become strong and courageous. The guy in turn said that his girlfriend had not changed at all. She remained as small and fragile as in childhood. Claude closely watched their conversation from the carriage. The young Duke called the second guard over and asked if he could take this new recruit with him for a while. It seemed he knew the Duke's guest and they wanted to chat for a while. Claude called the young people into the carriage so that they could talk in a calm atmosphere. He saw perfectly well that the girl was incredibly happy to see her old acquaintance, so he created more calm conditions for communication. Within minutes, the young Duke realized he had made a mistake. Isaiah had terrible manners. The boy saw how big the gap was between the old friends now. Melody had become a real lady. The young knight asked why his friend was riding around town in a water carriage with the Duke's son. What did that even mean? And Melody replied that she owed a lot to Duke Baldwin, and now she and Claude were traveling on business. Then the young Duke decided to treat Melody to chocolate and bought some for the girl. But Isaiah said that knights are not given such a delicacy and ate almost all the treat himself. Melody was ashamed of her friend. Then suddenly Isaiah got down on one knee and thanked Claude for taking such good care of his friend. He had no idea that the children of dukes could be so kind and well-behaved. The situation was stupid. Isaiah looked too stupid, but he didn't even notice it. Claude continued to try to remain calm and polite, but he was doing a bad job. Suddenly, the girl remembered Mrs. Merlin's words from their last meeting. The woman asked to slap her son on the back of the head if she suddenly met him in the capital. Yes, it wouldn't hurt to slap this impudent fellow. So the girl got up from the sofa and in a commanding tone asked the young knight to sit down and write a letter to his mother right away. The woman was very worried about him, and he, a fool, didn't even think about her. This fool could not even imagine how worried his mother was about the life and well-being of her son. She waits for a message from him every day, but Isaiah does not find a few minutes to write a few lines to his mother. The boy shouted that he would not write to Mrs. Merlin. How could he let anyone know about himself after he had refused to become a doctor and fled to the capital? His mother would be very disappointed in him if she found out how he was living now. But Melody convinced the guy that his mother was already disappointed in her son because he had never written to her. How could one be such an irresponsible and callous son? Then Melody gave the guy a quick rundown of life in their hometown, asked Isaiah to write to his mother every month, and he should also ask forgiveness from this holy woman. But, as it turned out, the young knight had never written a letter in his life. He doesn't even know how to do it or what to write about. Of course, Claude came to the rescue and kindly agreed to help. When the letter was written and sent by Mrs. Merlin, the girl said goodbye to her childhood friend. Then she thanked Claude for his invaluable help, and he was only glad to spend more time with this beautiful girl. The meeting with her old childhood friend distracted the girl so much that she didn't even notice how the Central Prison Management Department's working hours ended. It was awkward in front of Claude. She took up a lot of the guy's time. But he was only happy about this situation. He really enjoyed spending time with Melody. Besides, he still had 2 free weeks of vacation, and there was nothing to do in the house anyway. And the guy was also glad that he met Isaiah and saw what this guy was like. It was necessary to make sure that Melody did not fall under his bad influence. The girl immediately understood that Isaiah Claude did not like. Of course, these 2 young people were from different worlds. They did not understand each other at all. But Isaiah did not care about that. When they were little and played outside all day, everything was much simpler. Now they are in the capital, and each of them has their own story. Everything has changed a lot for each of them. The next day, the friend came straight to the ducal palace to see Melody. He even managed to ask his boss for permission, which is not so easy. It cannot be said that Melody was really looking forward to her friend, but she was still pleased. As it turned out later, the young knight came not only to Melody. Yesterday he agreed with Claude that he would teach him how to write letters correctly. That is why he is here and is eagerly awaiting a meeting with the young master. This information pleasantly surprised the girl. The only thing that has not changed in Isaiah is his ability to keep his word. He promised Melody that he would write a letter to his mother, and he will definitely do it. Claude asked me to tell him that he had a lot of things to do, and he would only be able to work with the night later in the evening. So Melody and Isaiah decided to spend the whole day together and remember their happy childhood. Some time passed and Claude appeared in the living room. The guy looked rather strange and worried. Melody asked him what had happened to him. He said that he was in a hurry to get things done so that he could see Isaiah and help him. And he also told Loretta that Melody's childhood friend had arrived. The girl was very surprised and alarmed. She doesn't want to lose her nanny and is afraid that the night will take her away. In fact, the girl understood that it was not Loretta who was afraid. It was Claude who did not like her friend and did not want Melody to spend too much time with him. Then little Loretta appeared in the doorway. Her eyes were wet with tears. She was offended that she was not invited to the guest. She was also interested in seeing Melody's friend. Claude immediately ran up to his little sister, picked her up in his arms, and began to calm her down. He promised the girl that when he was free, he would immediately play hide-and-seek and tag with her. Isaiah found this situation funny and a little confusing. How could a grown man spoil a little girl so much, even if she was his sister? And why was Melody silent? After some time, people sat down at the table, and Claude began to teach the young knight how to write letters correctly. Under the clear guidance of Isaiah, he had already written several. It seems he got the hang of the process and understood everything the first time. Milo didn't remember that it was not for nothing that her friend was considered the smartest boy in the village in childhood. He grasped absolutely everything he was taught on the fly. So now there were no problems. Then Claude turned to Melody and handed her a piece of paper. He asked her to write a letter as well, so as not to lose her grammar and style skills. To achieve perfection, one must constantly maintain the form. Melody eagerly took the sheet, but the next minute she hesitated. She hadn't written a letter for a long time, and who was she supposed to write to? But Claude suggested that she not choose an addressee, just write whatever came to mind. The guy suggested that she write about what the girl had to go through. Think about that day on the path of life. It is best to choose the most recent case. This is the person to whom you can write a letter. Was there anyone recently who could help her in a difficult moment and solve complex problems? I didn't think much about it. Yes, there really was such a person. The girl even clapped her hands with pleasure. She definitely needs to write about Loretta. After all, it was this girl who had radically changed her life and continues to do so now. The little girl heard Claude's conversation with Melody perfectly well, so she wrote a reply letter to her nanny without thinking. In it, she once again confessed to the girl that she loved her very much. When all the letters were written, and some were even sent to the lady doctor in her hometown, Isaiah decided to say goodbye. He was rushing to work, but promised to visit his friend from time to time. Finally, he decided to ask Melody for something. He asked the girl not to meet her mother under any circumstances. Melody is too kind, and people take advantage of this, including her own mother. She needs to learn to be cold-blooded. When he saw the girl at the entrance to the prison, he was very surprised and calmed down. He was curious whether Melody really came to her crazy mother. But fortunately, it turned out not to be so let him not change his mind in the future. Girls don't need to worry about the criminal and slave trader. All you need to remember is how she bullied Melody. So let her forget about her mother's last request, because she'll never change anyway. Melody decided to calm her good friend down. She told him that she had long ago decided not to visit her mother. Decision, she would not change it under any circumstances. She would not torture herself any longer. The next morning, the butler Higgins entered Melody's room and informed her that a guest was waiting for her. The girl thought that Isaiah had come early again to spend time with her. But how great was Melody's surprise when the man said that it was not the young knight who was waiting for her in the living room, but a completely different person. The girl became wary. Who could be looking for a meeting with her, and for what reason? When Melody came downstairs, she was very surprised. The postman was standing near the door, holding a beautiful bouquet of flowers. He smiled awkwardly and handed the bouquet to the addressee. He bowed and said that he had been asked to give the girl this modest bouquet. Melody asked again if the man had mixed up anything, but he quickly shook his head and continued to smile. The young man then said that he had thought for a long time about his words about Melody's birthday being celebrated on any day she wanted. Now he wanted to ask if he had offended the girl with his words. Birthday is a unique holiday for everyone, and perhaps his words seemed too rude to the girl, so he came to apologize and took these flowers with him. Melody felt awkward in this situation. She accepted the flowers and thanked the man for his attention. She was not used to being addressed like that. Then the postman suggested that the girl choose a specific date of her birth. Then she would definitely associate herself with this day of the year. In addition, the girl would receive many congratulatory letters from those who care about her. He knows what he's talking about, because due to his profession, the guy delivers dozens of letters every day. That's why he believes that everyone has the right to enjoy a special attitude towards themselves on their birthday. Melody thought for a few minutes. This man spoke wise words. She should definitely choose her special day. It would be filled with joy from time spent with loved ones. The postman told her about ordinary human joys that had been inaccessible to Melody until now. Her mother had never held any celebrations in her daughter's honor. How could she choose her special day if she didn't even know the season she was born in? Without telling anyone, Melody asked for a carriage to be prepared. She urgently needed to go to the prison. She remembered her friend Isaiah's request very well, and before meeting the postman, she was sure that she did not want to see her mother, but she really needed to ask the woman her date of birth. That would be right. She decided that she would tell her friend everything later and be sure to apologize to him. But now, when the last moment had not yet been missed, the mother had to see the criminal. As always, Claude volunteered to accompany the girl. He asked not to blame himself for the fact that Melody changed her mind and wanted to see the prisoner, so there are good reasons for that. The guy said that he would gladly go with Melody inside the building. In any case, he is the son of an aristocrat, so no one with him would allow themselves to treat the girl disdainfully. To be honest, Melody was very glad that she would have support in these difficult moments after meeting her mother. She did not want to use Claude, so she asked him to wait for her outside. The guy said he would wait for her in the carriage. She probably wanted to talk to her mother one last time, alone. He understood all this perfectly well, so he wouldn't interfere. The young man told Melody not to hurry, because this was her last meeting with her mother. He would wait for her as long as necessary. The girl should close all the questions that concern the woman. A guard came out to the carriage to escort the girl to the prisoner's cell. She said goodbye to Claude and headed to the prison courtyard. Out of the corner of his eye, the young duke noticed that someone was watching the girl from around the corner. He pretended not to notice but continued to watch the stranger. Perhaps this was some kind of trap. And yes, along the corridors of the prison, Melody was very surprised. Inside it was very clean and light. Then she realized that this was a prison for aristocrats. Her mother was sitting here only because of the Duke's request. Suddenly, someone grabbed the girl by the arm and pulled her to the side. She was so scared that she couldn't even scream or call for help. Her escort either didn't hear anything or pretended not to hear. When Melody came to her senses a little and turned her head to see who had kidnapped her, she was very surprised. It was Isaiah, who was now giving her a sign not to make a sound. The guy whispered quietly to Melody to be quiet. He would help her get out of here, and when the guard realized that the girl was missing, he began to call her loudly. Isaiah pulled the girl by the hand, and they ran. Melody still couldn't understand where and why this lunatic was dragging her. All he said was that he would take her through the passage that knights use. On the move, out of breath, the guy began to explain that these vile aristocrats had set everything up so as to force the girl to come here, but it was only for their own good. He had been living in the capital for a long time and understood all this perfectly well. Melody finally managed to pull her hand out of the guy's grip. She asked him to stop and calm down. No one forced her to come here. She decided so herself. The guy got really angry. What the hell is Melody doing? She wants to talk to the woman who has been hurting her all her life and has gone crazy from not being able to control her daughter for the rest of her life. He called the woman's actions truly selfish. You can't even treat other people's children like that, and Isaiah will do everything to prevent Melody from seeing this vile deceiver. Suddenly, a silhouette appeared from around the corner. She looked back and saw Claude approaching them. His expression was very worried. From the outside, it seemed to him that Isaiah was offending the girl. The Duke's son turned to the knight and said that he did not want to order him yet, but only asked him to move away from the girl, otherwise he would have to use force. But it seems the guy didn't listen. He pounced on Claude with reproaches. How could the guy bring a girl to such a place? He has no idea how Melody lived before and how badly her mother treated her. The guy turned to his girlfriend again. He asked her again if it was true that she really wanted to see her mother herself. He couldn't believe it. Melody understood perfectly well that her actions had hurt the guy's feelings. She had promised him not to see her mother anymore, and now she was breaking her promise, but everything needed to be put in its place. She turned to Isaiah and explained to the boy that the young Duke had also dissuaded her from this act, so it was not his fault. She had decided so herself and wanted to do it. The guy still didn't understand his girlfriend's motives. Did she really forget all the insults and bullying from her mother so easily? After this meeting, the girl would suffer and be tormented for a long time again. Why would she do that? Melody said she had just one question to ask her mother. After that, she would leave and never see her again. Claude got tired of watching this scandal and asked security to take Isaiah away. Then the Duke's son warned the boy not to be punished, but simply taken outside. He needed to get some fresh air and calm down. Then Claude asked to take the girl to her mother. The guy tried to calm Melody down. Isaiah will be fine. He's just hot-tempered and needs to calm down a bit. I'm sure he'll be asking for forgiveness the next day. Melody replied that she understood her friend perfectly well because she had promised him not to go to her mother. But the guy replied that this did not give the knight the right to grab her hand and drag her in an unknown direction. The girl began to defend her friend. She said that she did not feel any pain, but Claude did not even want to listen. He saw that the girl was very scared of Isaiah's behavior, so he decided to act. The young Duke even offered to come to the prison next time. Now they needed to take the girl to the doctor to examine her wrist, but Melody categorically refused. The girl asked how Claude ended up within the prison walls. After all, he was supposed to be waiting for her in the carriage. The guy replied that he saw Isaiah near the prison walls and suspected something was wrong. Then he followed him. The young people found the guard again and asked him to take Melody to her mother. Claude said that he would not interfere and would definitely wait for her outside now. Let it all be over already. Melody thanked the young man again. He was even better in real life than in the novel. How could he be so kind and brave at the same time? And why did he protect her from all the troubles? The slave trader was for some reason sure that her daughter would definitely visit her. She is very weak-willed, so she will not be able to refuse her mother's last request. The woman asked if the aristocrats were offending her. The woman asked the girl to listen to a story. One day she met a priest. He frightened her, telling her that after death the woman would be cruelly punished, showed strange letters. Melody felt very sad. She remembered the Duke's words about how a dying person always tries to ease his sins, and now she could see it clearly. Her mother was not going to ask for forgiveness at all. She looked at the lost woman again. She looked straight into her eyes. There she saw no remorse. Then she quietly told her mother that she might not apologize for all the evil she had done to her. These words made the woman very angry. She started shouting loudly and reproaching the girl for speaking rudely to her mother, and this is completely unacceptable. She just needs to listen to her mother. Melody warned that if the woman continued to yell at her, she would simply leave and no one would be able to stop her. The girl no longer wanted to explain anything. All her expectations had collapsed. She told her mother that she had long ago decided to live a normal life, and a woman like her mother could help her with something. Let her just tell her what day the girl was born. It is very important for her and will help her a lot in the future. The woman was silent for a while and then began to wriggle out of it. It was obvious that she had no idea about her daughter's birth date. The criminals said that after Melody was born, her mind became clouded, so she didn't remember anything. Only at that moment did the girl understand how right her friend Isaiah was. She shouldn't have come here and been disappointed in her mother once again. She had been warned that it would hurt again. The slave trader began to smile stupidly and assure her daughter that many people live without knowing their date of birth. After all, it is not important at all, and you can live perfectly well without it. I said no more words. Good job. Get out. The enraged woman shouted something after her, blamed the girl for all her misfortunes, and called her all sorts of stupid things. But Melody didn't expect anything else from her mother. Then the woman shouted that on Melody's birthday, it was snowing, although it was spring outside. Guards were walking around her house, so she was afraid to go outside to get to the hospital. The woman went into labor and decided to go out through the backyard to see the doctor. She suffered a lot because of the little baby, but she did not abandon Melody. The girl didn't manage to learn anything new, so she turned to her mother for the last time, bowed to her, and said goodbye forever. This was their last meeting in this life. She walked along a very long corridor and could not understand what she was feeling at that moment. There was definitely no regret or pity for her mother in her soul. She also did not feel guilty. There was some kind of total emptiness. At the end of the corridor, she saw Claude. He was waiting for her in the same place. The guy immediately wanted to cheer the girl up and said that she was very brave. The young Duke extended his hand to Melody and said that he would take her back to the Duke's house. He considered it necessary not to leave the girl alone with her sad thoughts. For Melody, these words sounded rather strange. Claude said that they would return home, but it was not her home at all, although she would very much like it to be so. The Duke's palace had long since become her home. Duke Baldwin spent the whole evening in his office. He was waiting for Melody to return from prison and was even a little worried about her condition. It must be hard. She always says goodbye to her mother, if she is a criminal. There was a soft knock on the door, and Melody appeared on the threshold. She asked permission to come in and said that she had just returned home and that she was fine. The man invited the girl to the table. He wanted to talk to Melody. He knew about the incident that happened in prison. He was sorry that Isaiah scared the girl. Melody asked Mr. Baldwin not to punish her friend. He did it out of good intentions and tried to protect the girl from another mistake. After all, he knew very well what kind of mother hers really was. Baldwin listened carefully to the girl and promised not to touch the guy. Then he asked the girl how her meeting with her mother went. Did they manage to communicate normally? Then the man picked up a fashion magazine from the table. He hinted that the cold weather was coming, and the girl had no clothes for cold weather, so he suggested that she choose some clothes from the catalog. The man said that in this magazine everything is sorted by types of clothes. Melody picked up the edition. She understood that the Duke had already reviewed all the models several times and even imagined which ones might suit the girl. But then Melody thought, what does this have to do with her? Perhaps the Duke wants the girl to pick out winter clothes for little Loretta. Of course, as a father, he cares about his child. So Melody, without hesitation, replied that she would immediately take the magazine to little Loretta's room, and together they would definitely choose a winter wardrobe for her. When the girl left the walls of the office, the Duke sighed sadly. This was not what he wanted to convey to Melody, but he failed again. Even the butler laughed at him. On the way to her room, the girl was already imagining how beautiful little Loretta would look in a pink fur coat. Now she would pick out the most beautiful outfits for the little one. Melody came around the corner and saw Claude. He was pushing a cart with books and other various records somewhere, but why couldn't this young man sit without work and enjoy life? Coming closer, the guy smiled cheerfully. He knew perfectly well that the girl thought that he would now make her sort out all these letters. But the Duke was not going to make the girl work. The young men began to talk. Loretta asked what Claude was currently researching. He was probably looking for some information for the academy, but he replied that he was looking for information for himself. Then he handed the girl a beautiful book with a blue cover. He said that he knew that the girl was unsuccessfully looking for some information, so the guy decided to help her. He said that the book was very old. It had been put under a preservation spell, so the edition was very well preserved. Then he asked the girl to open the book to the first page. To say that Melody was surprised would be an understatement. On the first page of the publication was written the year of her birth. The girl's eyes widened in surprise. Would she really find out the date too? So that's what the young gentleman was looking for. It was snowing heavily on her birthday, even though it was spring outside. So Melody looked for weather reference books from previous years. And her mother also said that on that very day she was hiding from the guards, who were all over the street. Perhaps she had committed some crime and they were looking for her. Claude assumed that if the slave trader hadn't lied, there should have been some record of her crime. He just had to look hard enough. Emily's mother went from house to house asking for help, but no one opened the door. Claude concluded that it was the emperor's order not to let the criminal into the house. If the order came from above, it meant that the royal family was coming to town that day. That's why there were a lot of guards on the street, and Melody's mother was hiding from them. In the distant past, there was an unconfirmed rumor of a cruel mercenary who attempted to kill members of the royal family. That is why security measures were increased in the city. According to the stories, this mercenary stopped in a village and pretended to be a traveler. He took refuge with one of the residents, whose house was near the road. An important person was traveling. Eventually, the mercenary was captured by the king's knights. But from then on, for safety's sake, the villages through which the royal family passed were forbidden to open their doors to any strangers. Claude said that members of the royal family very rarely leave the capital. However, if they do leave, they always try to adhere to this rule. It so happened that on Melody's birthday, a royal carriage passed through her town. It was the king's younger brother, who decided to visit the lands of Earl Graham's. At that moment, Claude showed the girl a thick reference book that contained absolutely all the information about the life and activities of the royal family. Melody had no idea how the guy managed to get this book. The young man handed the book to the girl and smiled cheerfully. He said that he had broken the law a little to get this edition, but now they could definitely find out Melody's date of birth. Even though it was late at night, the girl didn't feel like sleeping at all. She planned to take the book from Claude and start looking for information about the spring day when it snowed. She was so close to the truth. Just in case, the girl asked if the young duke was planning to load her with work for the night, but the guy smiled and replied that she was completely free until the morning. The young man tried to cheer the girl up in every way. He said that they were close to solving the mystery of Melody's birthday, and when the truth was revealed, they would have another celebration. But for some reason, she began to doubt. Perhaps it was not in her hometown, and it could also happen that her mother could have mixed something up because she said that she had temporarily lost her memory. The guy leaned over to Melody and told her not to lose hope. He was sure they were on the right track and that everything would work out. He believed that she would not give up and would cope with everything. And the young duke also reminded her that he was always there and ready to help at any moment. The girl could not fully understand why this man was so kind to her. Could such things really happen in life? Melody decided to ask her directly why Claude was so nice to her and always protecting her. He replied that he didn't see any reason why he should treat her badly. He asked the girl to imagine for a moment what would happen if he dared to offend his best friend and nanny of his dear little sister. Melody did not even want to imagine such a picture. The guy added that he thinks the girl is very strong and respects her for this quality. She has experienced many bad moments, so it is logical that now Melody deserves only happiness. The girl remembered how almost the entire street made fun of her as a child. Children shouted that someone like her shouldn't have a birthday at all. She was a half-breed who wasn't needed even by her mother. After looking at the book she had been given for a while, the girl began to cry bitterly. Claude was very scared because he didn't know what was going on and why Melody was acting like that. He ran up to her and asked what had happened. As it turned out a second later, she was crying from happiness. She managed to find a page with notes about the spring snowy day. Yes, it happened in her city. Claude was incredibly happy for the girl. He was waiting for her to finally tell him about her birthday. He would remember this date, and in the future, he would try to make this day unforgettable for her. Finally, she became a normal person, a full-fledged part of this society. She got her own birthday. She gave birth on March 15th, on a snowy spring day. The next morning, a sad Isaiah was already sitting in the living room of the palace. He came to see his girlfriend and ask her for forgiveness. He had behaved like a real fool, and now he was very ashamed of his behavior. When he saw the girl, he immediately started apologizing. He didn't need to be so harsh. He should have listened to her, and only then made any conclusions. This was her mother, and Melody had the right to do as she saw fit. The girl asked the guy to get up off his knees and said that she should ask him for forgiveness for the past. It was he who told her to fight back against her offenders. Only now did she listen to his advice. On the one hand, Isaiah was sad that his little friend had become independent and didn't need his help. On the other hand, he was proud of her. She was great. After dinner, Ronnie began to show his displeasure. The Duke's youngest son came to Melody and began to demand that she treat him the same as his older brother. The girl smiled and said that it would not be difficult for her. She could bring tea to the Duke's youngest son's room in the morning, but it would be better if it were milk, not tea. The boy demonstratively pouted, showing dissatisfaction with his entire appearance. Why should milk be brought for him? Why did everyone consider him a small child? But most often Ronnie behaved like a little child. He demanded marshmallows, chocolate. Sometimes he refused to eat at all. But Melody endured everything. One day, Ronnie and Isaiah had a competition. They were playing cards. If Ronnie lost, he would never call Melody a maid again. Everyone around was fighting for the girl's attention. But somehow it always turned out that Loretta, who didn't even take part in the competition, always won. Accordingly, she got all the love and attention from Melody. The boys were just amazed at how this little sly one managed to fool them. Probably Loretta knew some secret, but she didn't want to share it with anyone. And so it went on endlessly. Melody didn't understand at all how to reconcile all her friends with each other because she didn't want to lose anyone. The situation was quite complicated. When everyone got tired of cards, young Master Ronnie suggested breaking into the butler Higgins's office and stealing a piece of jewelry from there. No one knew what kind of jewelry it was, but it turned out to be tempting. Ronnie then began cutting Isaiah's hair, calling him a coward for not wanting to break into someone else's room illegally. Things were getting dangerous when Melody's friend entered the game. This game was supposed to be a real adventure for the young people. Loretta said that she would also like to take part and secretly enter the butler's room. For generations, the Higgins family served the Baldwin family. Their job was to record every event that occurred in the Duke's household. That is why there were so many books in the butler's office describing the Baldwin ducal family. The butler did not miss a single detail of their life. All these records, which were kept on the shelves of the library, belonged to the hand of the butler. These massive, honest works, including every day of life, were the pride of Mr. Higgins. It seems that the boys' argument has gone too far. After all, they really did decide to sneak into the butler's office. Whoever is noticed first will be considered the loser. Each of the guys was already developing a clear plan for getting inside the office. It might be necessary to get in through the window, because the door is locked and there is always a guard hanging around. Ronnie decided to start the game first. He figured out when the guards left for dinner and snuck into Mr. Higgins's room. He wanted to win so much that he even forgot about his sense of fear and safety. The butler's room was dark. As always, it was in perfect order. Everything was in its place. Stacks of some documents lay neatly on the desk. But before the boy could look around, someone else entered the room. It was Melody. She said that she was looking for Ronnie all over the house. They needed to bandage the boy's finger. While working on her finger, Melody said that she was very sad that the boys had an argument. The Duke had already forgiven her friend once, and if Isaiah got caught this time, he would be expelled from the night school. The younger Duke seemed to be very hurt by the girl's words. He confidently said that Isaiah was his guest. Therefore, his safety was the responsibility of the young master. Suddenly, Melody laughed out loud. The guy asked him in confusion what was funny about what he said. The girl answered that she had known for a long time that Ronnie really liked her friend. He just didn't want to admit it. The boy replied that he couldn't stand this ignoramus. He couldn't stand him. But then he asked Melody what question she wanted to ask him, and the girl asked, "Why does Ronnie ask to bring him tea to his room every day? He doesn't like this drink. He probably has something to confess, but he can't bring himself to do it." Indeed, the Duke's youngest son had long wanted to apologize to the girl for calling her a liar at their first meeting and asking her to get out of his father's palace. Then he finally decided to explain his behavior. The thing is that many different swindlers came to them under the guise of his father's children. Of course, the boy took Melody for a swindler. That's why he behaved so badly. The girl was so surprised that she didn't even immediately figure out what to answer the boy. He thought that Melody simply didn't want to forgive him, so he got angry again. Then Ronnie started apologizing again. He said he was the most honest person he knew. He showed his thoughts through his actions and emotions so Melody could read him easily. Then there was a short pause. It was clear that the boy wanted to say something else. After a pause, he asked the girl to leave them. She had nowhere to go, and no one likes to be alone. Loretta is at home now, and Claude has come for the holidays. The house is cheerful and cozy. The only thing missing is another brother, Jeremy. He is in the Magic Tower. According to the plot of the novel, the third son of Duke Baldwin had a unique opportunity to become a great magician. Therefore, he spent most of his childhood in a magic tower. Before Loretta was born, Ronnie was the only child in the Baldwin household. He would have been very happy if there had been someone younger than him around, but all the parishioners turned out to be liars. The boy watched as every day some swindlers who brought small children to their home were thrown out of the house. Little by little, Ronnie lost hope and fell into real despair. Melody listened to the boy's story in silence, not missing a single word. Now she understood perfectly why Ronnie had called her a liar when they first met. He was not used to trusting strangers. Then the girl asked Ronnie to tell a little about his second brother, Jeremy. The boy's eyes lit up. He said that his brother was amazing. He sent a letter to the Imperial Palace on behalf of the Magic Tower, and one day he will become the best master of magic. And if Jeremy reaches such heights and becomes an official magician, he will definitely be called the Magician Baldwin. And this is very important because the Duke's family will thus be at the head of the Magic Tower. Suddenly, strange thoughts came into the girl's head. All the Duke's children asked her to stay in the palace. They found a common language with Melody. Everyone likes her, but it won't always be like that. The girl will grow up, and she will need to look for another place. The young people were so chatty that they forgot that they were sitting in the corridor near the door to the butler Higgins's office. Suddenly, the door creaked open, and the children jumped in surprise. They were terribly frightened because they did not expect that there was someone inside the room. Imagine their surprise when the knight Isaiah appeared on the threshold. The guy looked rather sad. Melody's friend suggested that they go into the butler's office together. When the children entered, they saw many bookshelves containing various manuscripts, magazines, and books. She immediately realized that this was the place where the great Higgins family heritage was kept. Well, something was wrong here. Isaiah assumed that a real thief had already been here before them. The knight glanced over the shelves once more. There was no doubt there was someone alien here. The July entries from 6 years ago were missing, and the rest for this year were still there, although someone could have taken them to read. But the girl objected. If someone had taken these notes to read, there would have been empty space between the books. But the books on the shelf are close together, which means this note was not there originally. Ronnie looked around with a sense of purpose, and then demonstratively sat down on the sofa. The boy said that if there was something really valuable here, it should be hidden properly. Melody immediately remembered Claude's words when he brought her the book from the archives. He said that something really important could not be obtained at all, even breaking all conceivable rules. The girl looked at the Duke's youngest son carefully and then asked, was there any special reason why she and Isaiah had chosen the June recording for their argument? The boy replied that it was just a game. In the story in the past, a duke and duchess made a wedding contract. They promised each other to marry at the wish of their families, and after a few years to live their own lives. Everything happened as they had agreed. But time passed, and their feelings for each other did not cool, but on the contrary grew stronger. However, they had no choice but to fulfill their promise. So that's what happened 6 years ago, perhaps in June. If so, that explains why the recording isn't on the shelf here. Duke Baldwin hid it where no one would find it. Claude must have invented this game. He probably wanted to investigate what happened 6 years ago. The guy turned it into childish fun to hide his search. Suddenly, a terrible silhouette of a woman appeared behind Isaiah. It was rapidly approaching. The children screamed in horror and began pointing their fingers behind the confused knight, who did not understand anything. As it turned out, a few minutes later, the head housekeeper couldn't sleep, so she was heading to the kitchen for some warm milk. She heard a noise in the office and decided to check out what was going on there. Melody and Claude were already working in the office from early morning the next day. The guy asked why the girl always helps him and never refuses. She definitely doesn't like this job. The girl smiled. Yes, she didn't like keeping statistics and rewriting a lot of information, but she liked spending time with this guy. She learned a lot of interesting and useful things. The girl told Claude that his younger brother really misses his other brother, the magician. He admires him and constantly sets him as an example. They are probably very close. Claude replied that Ronnie rarely saw his brother and missed him very much. Jeremy spent all his time, even holidays, in the Magic Tower. He had not appeared in the Duke's house for a very long time. When Melody first came to the Duke's palace, she had a strange feeling. After all, no one in this family mentioned the identity of Jeremy Baldwin. Everyone acted as if such a person did not exist in the family. The girl tried to remember the plot of the book. If she recalled what was written, then Duke Baldwin set such a rule, not to talk about Jeremy, so as not to hurt herself and the children. Claude looked at Melody carefully and said that she already knew enough for a simple guest or his sister's nanny. He would not tell her anything more about his younger brother. But he told about his sister. It turned out that Claude had come to Duke Baldwin's palace on his father's orders. He had come as Loretta's temporary protector, but tomorrow he was going back to the academy. It was obvious that the young man's words about returning to the academy had greatly affected the girl. She had forgotten that Claude had left the school only for the holidays. Now he had to return. Indeed, in the novel, the boy promised his little sister that he would stay in the palace forever. But one early morning, when the girl was fast asleep, he left his father's house. Claude offered Melody to walk him to the carriage in the morning while the little brother and sister were sleeping. The girl lowered her eyes. It was all too unexpected and sad. She had expected a completely different turn of events. The young Duke saw the changes in the girl's face and asked what had happened. She replied that she was a little nervous. Little Loretta would be very sad about her beloved brother's departure. From early morning, a carriage was already waiting for him at the entrance to the palace. To be honest, he didn't want to leave either. The life of the Baldwin family was very interesting and eventful. At the entrance, the butler handed the boy 2 letters. One of them was from little Loretta. She wrote that she loved her little brother very much and would miss him madly. The second letter to the young Duke was written by Melody herself. She thanked the young man for the time they had spent together. She also said that she had given up trying to find out her date of birth. It would lead to nothing anyway. But thanks to Mr. Claude, she was able to choose a day that suited her, and she will consider it her name day. He knows what day it is, so he can send her a greeting card. The girl wanted to see Claude off, but overslept. She threw a blanket over her shoulders and ran out into the street, hoping that the guy was late, but the yard was quiet and calm. The butler quietly approached the girl and said that she was a little late. Mr. Claude had left long ago, but asked Higgins to say hello to Melody. He was very happy to receive a letter from her. After a short silence, the man handed the girl a beautiful envelope with a blue seal. At first, she did not understand what it was, but Higgins immediately explained that it was Claude's response to her letter. Claude wrote that he was happy to share so much time with her. He hopes that with the spring breeze, bright everyday life will soon burst into Melody's life. She must leave all the bad behind and confidently move forward. Indeed, all the bad things must be left behind. She came to the Duke's house for a reason. It was a gift from the higher powers for all her suffering. Therefore, she should value every minute spent within these walls. After dinner, little Loretta decided to play hide-and-seek. Melody and Mr. Higgins had to find her. Usually the girl found the little girl in a matter of seconds, but now she hid very well. This time, little Ronnie helped Loretta hide from Higgins and Melody, and he decided to put the little girl in the carriage. The boy told her to keep her head down and wait patiently. Only in this way would she be able to win over her nanny. The boy was sure that if Loretta stayed in the carriage, her nanny would never find her. She would not even think of looking for the girl outside the house. Winter came very early this year. The Duke became sadder and sadder every day. Every year, when winter came, he received a letter from his son. But this year, no letter came. The little girl continued to sit in the carriage for quite a long time, but Ronnie told her not to give up. When Melody found her, he would definitely praise her for her intelligence and patience, so she had to wait until they found her. Suddenly, the girl began to remember one terrible day in her life. She was riding with her mom and dad in a carriage, and suddenly it turned over. Loretta did not remember anything after that. When she opened her eyes, she saw an unpleasant woman in front of her who was trying to pull her out of the carriage. Little Loretta began to tremble with fear and memories. On top of everything else, it began to pour outside. Huge drops drummed on the roof of the carriage, making terrible sounds. At this time, Ronnie had a lesson. The boy did not listen to the teacher well. I kept thinking about whether Melody managed to find his little sister. But then someone knocked on the classroom door. Melody appeared on the threshold, accompanied by a servant. The girl was terribly frightened. She said that she still could not find little Loretta. Perhaps the young master could help her with something, or give her some advice. Melody began to cry. She said that Loretta was never alone when it rained, because the girl was afraid of such weather, and now she was probably alone and needed their help. Ronnie had no idea that his joke could turn into a real disaster for his little sister. He figured that Loretta would get tired of sitting in the carriage in a few minutes and would give herself away. But today, his little sister was particularly stubborn. Without explaining anything, Ronnie took Melody by the hand and ran out into the street. The rain was pouring down, but no one paid attention to it. The boy and the girl headed towards the carriage parked nearby. Images from the past flashed before Melody's eyes. Her criminal mother told her how she managed to steal the Duke's little daughter from an overturned carriage. Was the girl really in the carriage now? In an instant, Melody ran to the carriage and pulled the door open. Ronnie ran up after her. The sight they saw shocked them at first, but after a moment the young people exhaled. Loretta was sleeping peacefully inside. Although it was very late, many of the windows in the magic tower were still lit. Young Duke Johnny Baldwin walked down the corridor. He heard the rain pounding the windows. A real thunderstorm was raging outside. Jeremy Baldwin was a lucky man. That's what everyone thought. He caught the eye of the tower's leader himself. The Duke's third son was a very smart and clever boy whom everyone loved. At the same time, on the other side of the country, Duke Baldwin was calling a doctor for his little daughter, Loretta. He was afraid that the girl had caught a chill while sitting in the carriage, or that she might lose her memory from fright. It was obvious that the doctor was very worried. And there was a good reason for that, because the little lady could not come to her senses. She lost consciousness, and this frightened everyone very much. The man suggested that perhaps the little girl had experienced some kind of enormous stress. He simply saw no other reasons. The little mistress's body was in perfect order. Melody started to cry. She felt so sorry for little Loretta. Ronnie stood and looked at the floor. The boy did not say a word, but it was obvious that he was terribly scared. Duke Baldwin was restless, but tried not to show it, so as not to frighten the children even more. He tried to calm Ronnie and Melody, said that everything would definitely work out and the baby would get better. Melody remembered that in the novel, the Duke's little daughter also often encountered problems and troubles, but there was no mention of the girl being unconscious for such a long time. The girl felt guilty again about this situation. Perhaps because she was changing the course of events, little Loretta was in trouble. Why couldn't she find the girl earlier so that she wouldn't be sitting in the carriage in the storm? To somehow calm down his sister's nanny, Ronnie brought her a bouquet of beautiful flowers. In this way, he tried to make amends. After all, he was her brother and should have thought about the consequences. He said that it was absolutely not Melody's fault. He was the only one who was completely to blame. He didn't know that the little girl was afraid during thunderstorms, which meant that he was a bad brother and had little interest in his sister's life. Melody suddenly smiled. Little Loretta really liked the flowers Ronnie had given her. Now she would take the bouquet to her room. Perhaps the scent of those beautiful tulips would bring the girl back to her senses. Duke Baldwin did not leave the confines of his daughter's room. Mr. Higgins was there too. The man suggested using the power of the magic tower. This was the only way to help the girl. They have already turned to the temple, but the sermons and prayers of the chief priest have given absolutely no result. Now there is only one way to bring the baby back to life, to ask for help from the magic tower. The Duke understood this perfectly well. His daughter had not regained consciousness for several days, so her body could be completely weakened. They needed to act as quickly as possible, and now he was ready to do absolutely anything for his daughter. For some reason, he remembered his wife. Before her death, the woman asked him not to tell the truth about her under any circumstances. Otherwise, this information could affect the future of their children. The woman was especially worried about Jeremy. She knew about his magical abilities. That's why she asked her husband after Jeremy left not to let people from the magic tower into the house under any circumstances. They could find the trace. The Duke sighed heavily. The man did not know what to do this time. He remembered his wife's last request very well. But now his daughter's life was at stake. The old butler understood what his master was thinking, so he tried to help. He said that there was no trace of the mistress left in the palace, so nothing bad should happen. Baldwin looked at his little daughter again and nodded slowly. The little girl's life was the most important thing now. So he asked Higgins to send an urgent letter to the magic tower. Mages call it a special cup that contains the power of bodies. On her first visit to the tower, Jeremy put as much magic into the cup as an adult mage. This boy was much faster and more capable than the other students. His cup was filled to the level of high-class mages. His talent and strength were frighteningly great. However, those who were honored with the title of followers of the magic tower were not supposed to have any shortcomings. They did not immediately become magicians, because the eyes of the wise tower owner saw the dark corners of their hearts. Sometimes Jeremy had strange visions. He couldn't understand what they started. Sometimes he saw his mother saving him from death, but he didn't remember such a fact from real life. The boy was called into the office by the tower's chief mage. He was its owner. The man noticed that the boy looked confused. Probably he hadn't had time to rest properly. The tower's owner, Mr. Owen, was a middle-aged man. He was always calm and spoke in a quiet, measured voice. Now he was asking the boy how he had coped with the monthly palace report. Jeremy smiled. There was no job here that he couldn't handle. So he replied that everything was fine, and he didn't even neglect sleep and food. For this, his boss praised him. After that, the guy took the documents out of the folder and handed them to the man. If he doubted the correctness and accuracy of his report, then let him look at everything and check it himself. There can be no mistakes here. The boss smiled and thought to himself that this boy was behaving like a wise adult. That was why he had assigned Jeremy to act as his right hand. The boy really deserved it. The tower owner called the guy into his office not to clarify the numbers in the report. The man asked the guy directly if he wanted to become a real magician. If so, the tower boss would give him a special assignment, after completing which he would initiate him into magic. Following these words, Owen put an envelope with a letter on the table, and Jeremy could immediately say where it was from, because the seal bore the coat of arms of his family. The letter was definitely from the palace of Duke Baldwin. The guy got a little tense. The tower owner said that the guy needed to go to Baldwin Castle. Of course, Jeremy wouldn't go there himself. He would find him a partner. But the guy said that he could handle everything on his own without any problems. He didn't need any helpers. Himself. So he asks his boss to give him a chance to prove himself. Whatever happens, he will not hesitate and will follow the path of his teacher. The very next morning, the carriage from the magic tower arrived at the Baldwin family palace. There, Jeremy was eagerly awaited, because only he could help save little Loretta. The guy walked in and greeted everyone. He introduced himself as Jeremy the cultivator and said that he was ready to provide his services. He had not yet received the title of mage, but he would try his best to help the Duke's daughter. Mr. Higgins smiled sweetly, but there was sadness in his heart. The son and father met a couple of years later, but the young gentleman introduced himself as a cultivator, not Jeremy Baldwin. To be honest, this was not the meeting Duke Baldwin had hoped for. He missed his son terribly, but he couldn't show it. In his heart, he hoped that Jeremy missed him too. Finally, the guy relaxed a little and allowed himself to smile. He said that he had heard about a beautiful guest who was currently living in the palace, but for some reason, he did not see her among those present. Ronnie gaped in surprise. How did his brother know about Melody? But then he remembered that his brother would soon become a magician. The boy said that their guest had fallen asleep. Very quietly, Jeremy whispered that it would have been better if he had been sold into slavery. Then he would not have to return to Duke Baldwin's house. He had no desire to come here again. Ronnie tensed up. He hadn't expected to hear such words from his own brother. It turned out that Jeremy had changed a lot, or maybe the boy had just imagined it. Mr. Higgins offered to take his guest to a quiet place so that he could rest a little after the journey, but Ronnie objected and said that he would take his brother to the room himself. The boy took his brother by the hand and quickly walked forward. What a rest. His sister was lying sick in bed and could die. First, let Jeremy save her and then go and rest. The boy had no doubt that the young magician would definitely help his sister. Jeremy is known to the whole district. Even famous magicians praise the boy for his abilities. Jeremy understood that his younger brother liked to feel like the boss in his parents' house, and he was just a magician who was asked to help a sick girl. So the boy asked Ronnie to take him straight to Loretta's room. A minute later, the boys were already in the younger sister's room. Here, everything was different from the magic tower, where simplicity and laconism were valued. In Jeremy's opinion, it was not worth spending huge amounts of money on such things. Then they went to the bed where the girl was still sleeping. Ronnie asked if he liked her. Jeremy answered that she was very beautiful, not suspecting that his brother asked not about his sister, but about the room. The boy listened to his younger brother chatter for a few more minutes, and then said that he needed to start examining the patient. But for that, absolute silence was needed, and it would be better if Ronnie left the room. The boy was a little upset, felt like he was out of place, but he didn't resist. He said he would wait quietly outside the door, and if Jeremy needed anything, he should call him. After the boy was left alone with Loretta, he came closer to her bed and looked at the girl carefully. Some strange memories flashed through his head. He remembered his childhood in fragments. He saw a woman who looked incredibly similar to the girl lying in bed, but the guy could not put all the puzzles together. At this moment, Melody ran to the door of Loretta's room. She was very excited, and when she saw Ronnie, she began to ask him about the girl's condition. The boy calmed her down and said that there was no need to worry about the baby's condition anymore. His brother Jeremy was with her now, and he would definitely cure his little sister. No one should even doubt it. Jeremy was going to cure the girl with magic. He examined her again carefully. She had no noticeable physical symptoms. The girl can't wake up because she's wandering through her memories. The girl's dream was so beautiful that she didn't want to wake up. Loretta wanted to prolong this vision as long as possible, and now Jeremy can directly get into her head and bring her out of the dream. But the guy really didn't want to use this method of treatment. After all, in the girl's dreams, he could again encounter the woman who came to his care. He sat down on the bed next to the girl and took her hand. His sister shouldn't worry. He would definitely find another way to wake her up without causing the slightest harm to her health. Suddenly he thought that this girl was much happier than him. Probably, her mother raised her with great love, which cannot be said about Jeremy himself. He has a very sad story about this. Melody and Ronnie were incredibly nervous as they stood outside little Loretta's door. Was Jeremy really going to use magic to cure the little girl? They were very eager to see the process, but Ronnie remembered his brother's request that he needed absolute silence to work, so he tried to stop both Melody and himself from bursting into Loretta's bedroom. Hearing a noise at the door, Duke Baldwin joined the young people. He asked what was going on. Irony replied that Jeremy was going to use magic to cure his sister, and Melody was against this method of treatment. The Duke leaned over to Melody and asked her not to worry. He and Higgins would make sure everything went as it should. She should just calm down and wait a little. The butler knocked on the girl's door and asked Jeremy's permission to come inside. The man then said that it was already late and he wanted to take the young master to his quarters. He should also rest, like everyone else in this house. The boy began to refuse, but Mr. Higgins insisted. He said that 2 maids would remain in the room with Loretta, and if anything happened, they would immediately report it. The man wanted to take the boy straight to his room, but Jeremy refused. He explained that he knew his way around the house perfectly well and would find his room himself. Higgins said goodbye and went to his quarters. Jeremy quickly found the right room, but stood at the door for a long time, not daring to open it. Memories came rushing back to him again, and they were not the most pleasant. With an incredible effort, the guy went inside. More than anything in the world, he didn't want to be in this room. Despite his strength of character and steely endurance, the guy was afraid that his nerves would give out. Footsteps were heard at the door, and then the Duke entered the room. He was holding a cup of hot chocolate. The man thought that his son would enjoy a sweet drink before bed to relax a little. Jeremy was really angry. How dare this man come here? He forced him to come into this room, to feel all the pain again and to disturb his memories, and now he bids him good night with a smile. The cup crashed to the floor, and the boy greeted the Duke, cursing this house and the entire Baldwin family. He already regretted coming here. The Duke stood and did not know what to answer his son. Jeremy said that he was disgusted by the thought of sharing the same last name with this man. As soon as the girl recovered, he would immediately leave the walls of this palace without wasting a minute. Duke Baldwin listened to all the offensive words directed at him, then silently leaned over and took his son's hand. Then he asked if he had been hurt by the shards of the cup. Now it was Jeremy's turn to be surprised. Jeremy was very surprised by the fact that his father was not angry with him at all, but he still said that as soon as he did his job, he would be given the title of a real magician, and then he would no longer need the Baldwin name. He did not hide the fact that his father's surname was disgusting to him, and as soon as the opportunity arose, he would immediately renounce it. Then he could breathe a sigh of relief and continue to hate the Duke's family. The Duke's eyes filled with tears. He was very hurt by such hurtful words of his son. He said that he had never crossed Jeremy out of his heart. He loved him and was ready to do anything for his happiness. The young magician was the first to break down. He also held back his tears but was afraid of such displays of emotion, so the guy stood up abruptly and ran out of the room, loudly slamming the door. He sank to the floor and cried. Everyone has childhood memories. He tried to erase his, every single one, and he almost succeeded. There was only one left that haunted him. He was 5 years old then, and one hot night, his mother's loud scream was heard, and a terrible pain pierced Jeremy's forehead. This was his first memory of childhood. He was unconscious, and his mother was hugging him tightly. And then, through some kind of veil, he heard her say that she would kill this child. He did not expect that such terrible words could come from his own mother. As a child, he could not fully comprehend the weight of these words, but one day the boy read in a book that the punishment for sinners was to take their lives, and only then did he really think about it. He continued to search for information on this topic and eventually decided that he was a very bad child, since even his own mother tried to kill him with her own hands. After some time, Duke Baldwin gathered his 3 sons and decided to have a serious talk with them. He needed to tell the children something about their mother, and they needed to listen to him. The father said that their mother urgently left the capital. She had accumulated a lot of work issues that needed to be resolved immediately. In addition, her health had deteriorated and she needed a change of scenery. The Duke also reported that his mother had suffered a terrible attack last night. He called a doctor, who recommended taking the woman out of the capital. She must undergo a course of treatment. At that moment, little Jeremy took this information personally. He blamed only himself for his mother getting sick. After all, he was a very bad child. She probably left because she didn't want to see him. The Duke assured the children that their mother would be fine, that she would recover and return to the palace. But little Jeremy did not want to listen to this. He felt that his father was lying to them. His mother always spent most of her time with his older brothers, and he often stayed alone in his room and watched from the window as his older brothers played with a woman in the garden. And he again concluded that the woman couldn't stand him. That's why she tried to kill the boy, and when it didn't work, she left altogether so as not to see this child anymore. Melody sat in her room, trying to come up with an excuse to go and visit little Loretta. It had been so long since they had seen each other, and she missed her ringing laughter terribly. She remembered that Mr. Jeremy was supposed to be on his break, so she quietly went out into the hallway and headed for her favorite girl's bedroom. Perhaps she could get there unnoticed. But the situation didn't turn out the way Melody had planned. On the way, she met Jeremy. He was sitting on the windowsill and reading a note. Seeing the girl, he frowned and asked what she wanted there. The boy jerked in surprise, and the piece of paper fell from his hands to the ground near Melody's feet. She bent down to pick it up and hand it to Jeremy, but then she saw the emblem of the magic tower on the paper. Melody bowed and apologized for disturbing the young master and frightening him, but he remained angry and said that he did not intend to talk to her or show her what he was reading. She said she didn't really want to talk about it. If it was some kind of document that even Jeremy couldn't figure out, she certainly wouldn't understand what was written there. To avoid unnecessary questions and to make sure the girl didn't doubt his mental and magical abilities, the guy decided to show her what he was reading and why he even used a dictionary to be on the safe side. The girl looked at the sheet and read it. It was a letter from the tower's owner. in which he informed how Jeremy should behave within the walls of his father's house. There was a whole list of habits and interests. The guy even froze in surprise for a second. How could she even decipher the handwriting of the main magician? Even with a dictionary, he couldn't read even half of it because the tower owner's letters looked like cosmic signs. The girl smiled. She had managed to attract the guy's attention to her person. It wasn't that difficult. She said that as a child she often read books to elderly lonely people. It was like that with each of the Duke's sons. At first, no one liked Melody, but when the guys saw her as a smart and cheerful girl, everything immediately fell into place. That's how it turned out with Jeremy. Ronnie was already heading to Jeremy's room. The boy also wanted to attract his brother's attention, but he didn't know how to do it, so he decided to bring him milk and fruit for breakfast, like in the Magic Tower. His brother should definitely be surprised, but it turned out that the housekeeper had long since beaten the younger son to the punch. Mrs. Higgins said that the Duke had long ago told her what his son liked to eat. Therefore, breakfast for the young gentleman had long been ready. Melody suggested reading all the letters that the tower owner had sent him. The guy, in turn, noted that the girl was not only smart, but also very beautiful. But then the young man got angry with himself. What was he even thinking about now? Melody was just a guest at the Baldwin house, and for some reason he had been looking at her for several minutes. What was going on with him? Ronnie was at Jeremy's door in no time. The boy ignored Mrs. Higgins's words that the young gentleman's breakfast was ready. His older brother was still in bed. Ronnie quietly came closer to the bed and secretly began to look at him. Jeremy must have been having a terrible dream, or something was hurting him. It was obvious from his expression. Ronnie decided to touch his brother's forehead and check if he had a high temperature. It turned out that Jeremy's forehead was hot. And then the boy noticed a big scar. Probably someone had hurt his brother in the tower. Suddenly, Jeremy opened his eyes. Seeing someone's hand in front of him, which was examining his forehead, the boy screamed in fear. Ronnie, in surprise, also jumped off the bed and fell painfully to the floor. The boy explained that he simply wanted to check if his brother had a fever under his forehead. He had no intention of scaring Jeremy. It had happened completely by accident. Then, out of curiosity, Ronnie began to ask who had beaten his older brother so much that he had such a big scar on his forehead, but the guy answered sharply that he would not tell anything about it. But the younger brother, of course, did not calm down. The boy said that he must definitely know who offended his beloved brother. He will grow up a little and will definitely punish the offender. Jeremy smiled evilly and told the boy that if he found out who had left that scar on his forehead, he would hate that person for the rest of his life, so he would keep quiet. Ronnie thought for a moment, but then said that he still wanted to know who did this to Jeremy. If he had to, he would hate that person for the rest of his life. But the young magician never managed to tell his brother who had left the scar on his forehead. There was a sharp knock at the door, and the servants announced that a guest had arrived from the Magic Tower and wanted to see the young master. Jeremy quickly went down to the living room. There at the table sat Duke Baldwin and Mr. Pierce, arrived from the Magic Tower. The man said that he came to help. Jeremy snorted and said he didn't remember asking for help, but the guest replied that once the perfecting Baldwin arrived at his home, he became more abrupt and independent. Mr. Pierce said that yesterday he read the report that the boy sent to the tower owner. The document was perfect, but he was worried because Jeremy Nee used the magic of the nervous system. The guy reminded her that he had indicated this information in the report, and there was nothing strange about it. He would wait until the girl woke up on her own. In the meantime, he was simply watching to make sure her body did not become exhausted. Mr. Pierce objected. He reminded them that this was a small child, and Jeremy must know that a child's mind develops many times faster, and this must be taken into account. If the magician does not become her guide as soon as possible and does not perform all the necessary manipulations, then little Loretta can reach the abyss from which there is no way back. They had waited long enough for the girl to return on her own, but now the tower wanted Mr. Pierce to come and take responsibility for the task. It was necessary for the reputation of the tower and the safety of the client. Jeremy was indignant. He turned red and started screaming. How is this possible, after all? The tower's owner appointed him the main one in this matter. His life and place as the main mage depend on it. After all, this is the last trial. Although it was very difficult for the young man, he still asked Mr. Pierce. He asked him not to do this. Jeremy had been waiting for this opportunity for a long time, and now he could not miss it. But the guest was adamant. He explained that it was not a matter of the young master's skill or ability. He had simply allowed himself to be too emotional, and that was absolutely not allowed. The Tower Master believes that Jeremy's safety comes first and always takes priority. Therefore, he should not do anything that causes him emotional pain. So Mr. Pierce apologized to the Duke for the girl still lying in bed. He said that he would soon rectify the situation, and little Loretta would be running around the corridors of the palace again. But then, the unforeseen happened. Duke Baldwin stood up from the table, bowed to Mr. Pierce, and asked him to give Jeremy another chance. The father understood how important this task was for his son. The guest was silent for a while. It was obvious that he was thinking about something, but then Pierce replied that Baldwin had no right to interfere in the decisions made by the tower's owner. After these words, the Duke's face changed. He became gloomier than a cloud and tried his best to control himself. Then he warned Mr. Pierce that he forbade the man to go up to the second floor to see his daughter. Then the Duke turned to his son. He expressed confidence that Jeremy would be able to awaken his little sister and that he would receive the desired title of Chief Mage. He had no doubts about his son. The boy looked his father in the eye for the first time since he had been in the house. He said that if he carried out the task entrusted to him, he would receive the title of Magician, and then he would no longer need the Baldwin name. The father was silent for a while, and then said that even if they disagreed, he would never stop loving Jeremy and helping him with all his might. And the doors of his home were always open to his son. Ronnie appeared on the threshold. The boy was also ready to do anything to help his brother achieve what he wanted. He overheard the adults' conversation and now came to support Jeremy. But the young magician was terribly angry. He was on the verge of a breakdown and could not cope with his emotions. Jeremy screamed that he did not need a father, and especially not such a brother. He did not need anyone from the Baldwin family at all. Realizing that in a second he would simply burst into tears in front of his younger brother, Jeremy turned sharply and quickly ran down the hallway. He didn't need to come here at all. He knew how this could all end. Melody was finally allowed to see little Loretta. She was lying in her bed, as before, without opening her eyes. The girl brought a book with the girl's favorite fairy tales and began to read. She believed that the little girl could hear her. She was very worried about her ward. Magic had never been used on Loretta before, and no one could give a precise answer as to whether everything would end with a positive result. There was a noise in the hallway, then the door suddenly opened and Jeremy entered the room. It was obvious that the guy was very excited. Without further ado, he asked Melody to leave the room. But then Melody felt little Loretta squeeze her hand. About this, Jeremy, let him see that the girl is starting to come to her senses. Finally, she will wake up. But the guy responded without any emotion that it was natural for people to move their limbs while sleeping. He didn't believe that the girl had actually grabbed Melody's hand and wouldn't let go. The guy said that now he was going to connect to Loretta's emotions with magic, and if Melody didn't remove her hand, she could get hurt. The magic would affect both of them. Jeremy knew perfectly well that Melody would ask a lot of questions about magic and its effect on the little girl, so he didn't want to go into unnecessary details and waited for the girl to finally take her hand off the baby. Melody realized that this was a serious matter. If she continued to hold Loretta's hand, she would be able to use magic to enter her mind without any problems. But she was ready for this. Jeremy didn't expect that an ordinary girl and the daughter of a slave trader could be so smart and self-confident. In addition, she understands the principle of magic. Jeremy also warned that if everything went according to plan, the girl would end up in Loretta's inner world with him. But if he made a mistake, Melody would never be able to wake up. So Jeremy warned the girl once again that she had better let go of the baby's hand. He can't and doesn't even want to be responsible for the consequences, but he promises that Loretta will be fine. Melody asked again if there was any danger for the girl if she got into her mind. The guy answered that the little girl would not even understand anything, and it would not affect her in any way. And she made the decision to hold the baby's hand during the magic session. Melody was sure that if Loretta became scared during the session, she would be able to easily help her, being in her thoughts. The baby loves Melody very much and trusts her completely. If she starts to worry or get upset during the magic, her emotions will become unstable, and this in turn will affect the result. The guy asked if the girl was afraid of being left unconscious forever. After all, he wasn't 100% sure that he would do everything right, but Melody only answered that her love for the baby was boundless, and she would be happy to help her. Suddenly, Jeremy said that he felt some magic power in Melody. It is very small, but he has good abilities, and the guy can distinguish a person with a special gift. Melody has one. Melody asked Jeremy to do one thing for her. When he gets into the baby's mind, he should try to talk to her as much as possible. When the girl talks about something, she becomes even cuter. The young mage frowned and replied that he would have certainly chatted with his little sister, even without any requests. After the procedure, he would still have to write a report on the task. Then Jeremy got up from the couch and said that they had been chatting for too long and needed to get down to business. He asked Melody to close her eyes so that she wouldn't be swallowed up by the depths of her mind. The girl should not be nervous under any circumstances, otherwise it could harm the baby. All she had to do was find Loretta's heart and hold on tightly to it. Jeremy was well aware that no one in the world could change their past. But on the other hand, every person has the gift of forgiveness. Forgiveness is always absorbed by the memories that fall under it. At this time, in the back room of the magic tower, in the master's office, a woman was sitting and talking to Owen. She asked if the man knew how much Jeremy wanted to become the chief magician. The stranger asked if the tower's owner could believe in this student more and support him. He was deeply hurt by the fact that the tower doubted him and did not give him the opportunity to realize his dream. The man looked sadly out the window and sighed. He understood all of this perfectly well, but the safety of this young man was above all else. Besides, the tower's owner did not want him to become a mage that his family had turned away from. The family also abandoned the tower's owner at one time. Well, it wasn't his relatives' fault. He distanced himself from them, completely immersed in the study of magic and forgetting about love and responsibility for his loved ones. The man loved Jeremy as his own son and did not want to hurt him in any way. He really hoped that this precious child of the tower would not harm herself during her stay in her father's house. At this time, Jeremy was already in the inner world of little Loretta. The guy found himself in a beautiful room, but there was a gloomy light. He needed to take a good look at everything. Melody couldn't go into the room with him because she simply fell asleep, but it was even better this way. Now no one would stop Jeremy from fulfilling his direct task and finally getting the title of mage. The objects in the room were in their proper places. This means that Loretta's ego has not yet penetrated into the depths of the heart. Otherwise, she would have lost all her memories and the room would be empty. He walked around the mansion. The house was very beautiful, but the guy didn't see any servants anywhere. Perhaps the girl had simply forgotten about her. The guy needed to hurry, and he headed towards one of the many doors. Opening it, Jeremy found himself in a beautiful garden. It was there that he saw little Loretta. She ran up to the guy, said hello, and asked who he was and what he was doing there. He smiled at his little sister and said he was a doctor and his name was Jeremy. The little girl smiled too. A light breeze slid across her cheeks, mixing with the warmth of the sun. Loretta was very sweet. The surroundings were very inviting, which meant that Loretta's inner world was very kind and bright. It seemed that the girl was familiar with such feelings as love and mutual understanding. The little girl took the boy by the hand and asked him to follow her. If he was a doctor, he would be able to help her very close person. This girl's name is Melody, and she is seriously ill. Melody, that was the name of that girl from Duke Baldwin's mansion. So she managed to penetrate the baby's consciousness, and she is here too. Jeremy thought the girl would not be able to get here, but she did. Little Loretta stopped in the middle of a beautiful alley. Not far from them stood a carriage. The guy guessed that Melody was inside this carriage, so he suggested to come closer. The guy opened the door to the inside of the carriage, and Loretta was the first to jump in. Melody was sleeping on the couch, so the girl asked the doctor to wake her up quickly. When Jeremy raised his head to look at Melody, he was horrified and froze in surprise. It was not Melody sitting there at all. His mother was sleeping on the couch. There was a moment of silence. Then the boy tried his best to pull himself together. He looked at Loretta and asked her if she was sure that this woman was Melody. The girl was surprised, then very upset. She was completely confused. How could it not be Melody if Loretta was sure that it was her? She couldn't help but recognize her favorite nanny. Jeremy noticed that Loretta was a very sweet girl. Her heart was filled with love for people. Love only brings good thoughts to her heart. That's why there is such a pleasant smell here. The boy suddenly burst into tears. It hurt him so much because his heart remembers so many bad memories. He can't forget that picture of one terrible day when Mother wanted to kill him even for a day. He turned to the little girl and said that it was not a melody at all. Their mother was sitting in the carriage. The little girl also started crying. She really wanted the woman to wake up. Yes, she would be able to hug her tightly and tell her how much she missed her. Suddenly, the carriage door slammed shut due to a strong wind. The carriage began to sway violently. The brother and sister lost their balance and fell to the floor of the carriage. Something terrible and unimaginable was happening. Jeremy realized what was happening now. The hidden memories suddenly opened up and started to act. The guy was shaking inside, and he had a hard time thinking about what to do next. Everything was mixed up in sharp gusts of wind. It seemed that the carriage was being carried away somewhere into the sky by a terrible whirlwind. The brother was worried about the little girl, and she held on tightly to her mother and was afraid to open her eyes even for a second. Little Loretta lost her mother during a storm when a carriage crashed, and now she was very happy to see her mother again. From Jeremy saw the woman who tried to kill him. Jeremy was the child his mother tried to kill. He became a talented man and a respected member of the Magic Tower. But he didn't know the answer to one question: why his mother left without explaining anything. He even asked the Tower Master about it, but he, hearing the same question over and over again, always kept silent. He honestly did not know what to answer the boy. The letters his father sent him said that his beloved mother had died, but Jeremy was a magician, and he knew for sure that this was not true. Something was clearly being hidden from him. At such moments, when Jeremy was in particular pain, the tower owner would hug the boy tightly, and he would give vent to his feelings. He would cry for a long time on the man's shoulders until he felt better. And now Jeremy leaned over to little Loretta and quietly asked her to go where she belonged. This nightmare was clearly not her place. She needed to get back to the living people who were waiting for her to finally wake up. Suddenly, a very strong whirlwind lifted the carriage high above the ground, and a minute later, it crashed down. Glass fragments flew in all directions. Jeremy tried to cover Loretta with his body so that she would not get hurt. But at that very moment, the boy felt that someone was covering him with their body. Suddenly, Jeremy's body was enveloped in a pleasant warmth. Finally, he realized that it was his mother who was protecting him from the fragments. Then the boy heard a woman whisper quietly. She asked the higher powers to protect her children. Even if she was destined to leave, let her little ones remain unharmed and live a happy life. They were all lying on little Loretta's spacious bed. She hugged her beloved nanny even in her sleep. Jeremy realized that these two had a real spiritual connection that could not be broken. The boy was clutching the petal he had seen in Loretta's room on the other side of reality. He had climbed into other people's minds many times, but he had never seen them cross over into reality. He suddenly realized that in this magic session, he was not the only one with superpowers. Melody also had a gift, although it was not as pronounced as his. The guy noticed that the girl was starting to wake up, and after a few minutes, Melody opened her eyes and got out of bed. She looked at Jeremy and asked if he had managed to bring the baby back to reality. The young magician said nothing, but with his eyes he asked the girl to turn back. She turned around, and at that very moment Loretta's small arms wrapped around her neck. The little girl had finally woken up. To say that Melody was on cloud nine would be an understatement. She thought that she would never let go of Loretta. She was so incredibly worried about her sweet girl. Finally, the little girl managed to get out of her nanny's arms. She smiled cheerfully and said that while she was sleeping, she realized one very important thing. She loves Melody and her own mother madly. Melody thanked the young mage from the bottom of her heart. He had brilliantly completed his task and also had not forgotten about her request and had spoken to Loretta. That was why the little girl was able to remember everything. Little Loretta looked at the boy mysteriously and said that now she knew everything. He was not just Mr. Jeremy, he was Jeremy Baldwin, and her mother told her that he was sweet and very smart. And her mother also told her that her brother, like Loretta herself, just needs to be in the world and breathe, so that everyone around them considers them charming children. The woman is very proud of all her children." The boy and the girl looked at the little girl carefully. Jeremy asked when exactly her mother had told her about this. It was very important for him to know about this. After all, he had hated his mother for so long. But the girl smiled slyly. She said that she would not say another word today, and all because she wanted her brother to visit Duke Baldwin's house once more. Then they would chat.